The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the book Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It, a book I wrote in 2006, but is frankly more relevant today than it was back then. Reading from page 11. There's a battle waging today in America that will decide the future of the middle class. On the one side are those like Jefferson who believe that if free people can govern themselves and have the right to organize their government to create a strong middle class, which will in turn keep the government democratic, small d. On the other side are those like Thomas Hobbes who believe that only a small elite can and should govern, and that the people should be willing to pay the price of poverty in exchange for security. Those who don't want democracy understand that a middle class will always work to create democracy, which is why they are so opposed to middle class creating government policies like free public education, limits to the concentration of ownership in the media, and social safety nets like universal health care and Social Security. They understand that such policies have and always will bring about a strong and vibrant middle class, which will in turn both demand and create a more democratic society, again, small d. Who are these people who want to undermine the middle class? They often call themselves conservatives, but those people are not true conservatives. They don't want to conserve or protect the America the founders gave us. I call them cons because they're conning America. My dad was a staunch Republican all his life, but he didn't believe that a small elite should rule America. He was glad the government provided safety nets like Social Security and Medicare and made unionization possible. My dad and most of the other real conservatives I've known believed in the middle class and believed in democracy. The battle we face in America today is not between liberal and conservative, nor is it between big D Democrat and Republican. The battle we face today is between those who want to protect our democratic heritage, small d, and the cons who want to create an America that benefits only a small elite organized around corporate power and inherited wealth. There are two types of cons who have worked together to screw the middle class. I call them the predator cons and the true believer cons. Predator cons are simply greedy. They use politics and/or philosophy as a cover for their theft of our common resources and as a rationalization for their growing wealth in the face of growing societal poverty and inequality. They're not conservatives in any true sense. They are not interested in conserving American values or even in keeping American wealth in America. They're the ones who ship jobs overseas, lobby for tax breaks from Congress, fight against the inheritance tax, and reincorporate their companies offshore to avoid paying U.S. corporate taxes. The predator cons' rationalization for their obscene pileup of wealth is that they're simply playing the game by the existing rules. And that's true to a large extent, except that they're also the ones who bought and paid for the politicians who set up the rules for them. They've conned America into believing that they care about the American economy when all they care about is making money for themselves. A great example of a predatory con is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. These agreements lower wages for American workers. They do not create well-paying jobs in America. They create record trade deficits. Cons don't even try to argue that free trade agreements are good for America anymore. Arguments like these, such as the Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, are passed now by a single vote in the Senate in 2005, only because corporate America needs them to reap tremendous profits from the low wages they extract in non-unionized, non-democratic, and socially disorganized countries. Predator cons succeed in passing these agreements by threatening to withhold campaign funds from anyone who dares to oppose them. It's an old game that the robber barons of the 19th century knew well how to play. The second type of con is perhaps even more dangerous than the predators. They're the true believers. Just as true believers in communism brought about the death of tens of millions in Russia from the time of the Bolshevik Revolution until the fall of the Berlin Wall, so too the true believers in laissez-faire capitalism believe that if only government would go away, everything would be just fine. Employers would become benevolent, employees would become enthusiastic, and bureaucratic inefficiencies would just vanish. These so-called free marketers aren't bothered by the consolidation of companies or the loss of competition that happens when markets are unregulated. Like Thomas Hobbes, the true believers assume that society will run best when run by the small elite that ended up on the top. They believe in corporatocracy, the view that an economic aristocracy benefits the working class because wealth will trickle down from above to below. Ronald Reagan was a true believer. He didn't understand economics, and the simple notions of self-sufficiency and a pioneering spirit appealed to him. He asked, in essence, why would somebody want to regulate a business? Wouldn't it eventually always do what is best without regulation? What Reagan and his followers failed to understand was that business will not always do what's best for society. In fact, the fundamental goal of business, to maximize assets and profits while externalizing costs and liabilities, is often destructive to the public good. This becomes particularly obvious when business owners do not live or otherwise participate in the same society and culture as their customers. A small business owner can't run sewage out his door or pay his workers below a living wage because he has to face his next-door neighbor and his next-door neighbor's kid who may want to work in his shop. Same is not true, however, for multinational corporations. Executives of large corporations don't live in the same society as the people who work for them or who live next door to their factories. As a result, the legacy of unregulated big business and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, that legacy is pollution, worker exploitation, cuts to workers' safety, and the bestowing of profits to the company's elite while cutting benefits to the company's rank and file. This is the book Screwed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and pleased to have you with us today. Boy, Neil Gorsuch. I'm like, I've heard that name before. Where have I heard that name? I mean, you know, like in my lifetime, in my memory. Turns out it wasn't Neil, it was his mother, Anne, that I was remembering. I was trying to, and you know, you can't, you know, trash somebody because of what their mother did. And besides that, she was a 2-pack-a-day smoker, so she died of cancer in her late 50s, early 60s. But her mom was the woman who Ronald Reagan put in charge of the EPA in 1981 when he became president. You know, with the specific mission of taking it apart, and you know, which produced some pretty startling. I mean, no, she slashed the EPA's budget by 22%. She aggressively rolled back the clean water rules, the clean air rules. This is you know what a House staffer this was back in 1983 said. In the first year of the Reagan administration, there was a 79% decline in the number of enforcement cases filed from regional offices to EPA headquarters, and a 69% decline in the number of cases filed from the EPA to the Department of Justice. In other words, she, you know, basically just kind of, you know, treated the EPA pretty badly. Gorsuch was only a teenager at the time, you know, when his mom became head of the EPA. But this from a piece by Brady Dennis and Chris Mooney in the Washington Post today. By the end of her stint at EPA, Ann Gorsuch was under siege. A half a dozen congressional committees were looking into allegations of mismanagement of the Superfund program. The House voted to cite her for contempt of Congress for failing to turn over subpoenaed records, the first such charge ever faced by a White House cabinet member. New York Times editorial in 1983 said, quote, Ann Gorsuch inherited one of the most efficient and capable agencies in government. She has turned it into an Aegean stable reeking of cynicism, mismanagement, and decay. Reagan actually forced her to step down. She wrote rather bitterly about this, by the way, in her autobiography, Are You Tough Enough?, her 1986 autobiography. She said her only crime was loyal service and following orders. Where have I heard that before? Anyhow, after her departure, the White House persuaded Ruckelshaus to return to the EPA to restore stability. Ruckelshaus, who came back to EPA to run it, a Republican, said the damage had been done to morale. There was fear in the agency. I told them we were going to respect science and the scientific method again. I told them we were going to carry out the mission of the agency. Once they saw that their work was going to be respected, in effect, they had their assignments back. They had their jobs back. That calmed them down. She died of cancer at the age of 62. And, but, you know, let's talk about Gorsuch. You know, not his mother, but him. This is a guy who apparently, you know, he wrote a book trashing the whole concept of death with dignity. He calls it assisted suicide throughout his book. And death with dignity is the law in several states now, that if you are within 6 months of dying, if you are in pain, and if two physicians sign off, I believe, as I recall, I may be wrong in some of these details, but it's close to this. But I'm pretty sure it's two physicians have to sign off that you are in fact dying. Then one of them can prescribe to you a dose of barbiturates. It's a little bottle, you know, an ounce or so of orange-colored, orange-flavored drink, and it's basically an overdose of, you know, one of the barbiturates, phenobarbital, presumably. So people they drink it, and they fall asleep, and they die in their sleep. And the doctor doesn't even have to be around. I mean, he just wrote the prescription. And in fact, when I was in Oregon, this was being debated in Oregon. And, you know, this whole issue of death with dignity, it passed when we lived in Oregon, when we were doing this show from Portland. And I had all these people calling who had been through this. Washington State recently picked it up. I think California might have. I'm not sure. I know it was a ballot initiative. I'm not sure if it passed. And there are other states that are looking at it. And it's just, you know, it's a not unreasonable thing, in my opinion. But, you know, it raises the question, you know, in fact, it raises a number of questions. But, you know, is death with dignity respect for all life? Or is it dissing life? So, you know, I mean, from the Catholic point of view, it's dissing life. That the Catholic Church is very, very opposed to the death with dignity laws. They consider it physician-assisted suicide. Apparently, so does Gorsuch, which and his book and his decisions on his writings on this. Oh yeah, it's legal in California, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, Montana, and Washington State. And you know, presumably he's applying that same standard to women who are pregnant. Which means, you know, are we going to see Roe v. Wade overturned? So what should be the Democrats' strategy on this? I find this fascinating. On the one hand, you know, Donald Trump was elected, arguably. I mean, you know, you've always got to throw in the caveat. You know, the majority of Americans didn't want Donald Trump, and if Chris Kobach and his buddies, you know, hadn't suppressed the vote in so many states, and you know, all these efforts by various Republican groups to suppress the vote, particularly interstate crosscheck, it's extremely unlikely, in my opinion, that Donald Trump would be president, or for that matter, that the Senate would be in Republican hands. But that's, you know, that's where we're at, and you know, the official story that we're all living by is that, you know, Donald Trump and the Republicans in the Senate won fair and square, and so he gets to have his nominee. But that was sort of the case. Well, it wasn't sort of the case. I mean, wasn't that the case with President Obama? Didn't he win the previous election fair and square? What happened to Merrick Garland? So I don't know how many days it's been. I haven't sat down and done the math on this, and you know, maybe one of you wants to, or somebody in our chat room can, you know, pop it up. But the number of days it has been from the day that Scalia died last February until today, or yesterday, you know, when this announcement was made, let's say it's 330 days. Maybe the Democrats should just say, come back in 330 days, or whatever the number of days is. You know, it's a little less than a year. So Chuck Schumer is speaking right now. You want to pick that up? Let's hear what Chuck Schumer has to say. He's going to be weighing in on this issue.
Just leftover remarks from yesterday.
Oh, maybe. Okay, come on, Chuck. Get with it.
Madam President, I rise today on a matter of great importance to everyone in this body and everyone in America, the future of the Supreme Court. Last night, the President nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch. We in the Senate have a constitutional duty to examine his record robustly, exhaustively, and comprehensively, and then advise and consent if we see fit. We have a responsibility to reject if we do not.
You notice that if we see fit?
We Democrats will insist on a rigorous but fair process. There will be 60 votes for confirmation. Any one member can require it. Many Democrats already have. And it is the right thing to do. On a subject as important as a Supreme Court nomination, bipartisan support should be a prerequisite. It should be essential. That's what 60 votes does. This is nothing new. It was a bar met by each of President Obama's nominations. In my mind, 60 votes is the appropriate way to go, whether there is a Democratic president or Republican president, Democratic Senate or Republican Senate. Mr. President, Madam President, because a 60-vote threshold is essential, those who say at the end of this process there are only two possible results, that the Senate will confirm this nominee or the Republicans will use the nuclear option to change the rules of the Senate, are dead wrong. That is a false choice. If this nominee cannot meet the same standard that Republicans insisted upon for President Obama's Supreme Court nominees, 60 votes in the Senate, then the problem lies not with the Senate, but with the nominee. The answer should not be to change the rules of the Senate, but to change the nominee to someone who can earn 60 votes. 60 votes produces a mainstream candidate.
There you go.
And the need for a
That's enough. Thank you, Chris. So that was, that's Chuck Schumer. I mean, literally as we speak, of course, he's a Democrat and he's talking back to the Republicans. So it didn't get picked up by any of the other television networks. I'm looking here at CNN and MSNBC. No, we don't need to talk about that stuff. But this is Chuck Schumer laying down the gauntlet, saying, we're filibustering this thing. And you guys you're going to have to convince eight Democrats to vote with you. Good luck. Now, there's a few, who are going to go along. I mean, Joe Manchin, his state was won overwhelmingly by both Trump and Romney. So he's kind of, caught in the middle. He's going along. There's probably a few other Democrats, but can they get 8? I'm skeptical.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And let's not forget, back in 2016, John McCain said that if Hillary Clinton became president, he would suggest that the Senate block her nominees for 4 years. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Paul in New York City, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
How are you, Tom? I love your show, and thank you for all the hard work that you're doing.
Thank you.
The question I wanted to ask you was about the DNC and what do we do now for 2018? To talk about the past, I mean, it's in the books. It's unfortunate, but we have to start looking forward as a party, as progressive, and getting our candidates elected and starting getting the DNC in position and start looking at districts and states that we can win so that we can actually start having a voice on Congress. What are your thoughts and what do you believe our strategy is, and what can we do to get this done, Tom?
I think that we need to be, I think the Democratic Party needs to be re-energized. We need to go back to Howard Dean's 50-state strategy. It needs to go beyond 50 states. We need to do what the Koch brothers have done and go into literally every congressional district in the United States, every county in the United States. You've got over 3,000 counties, and in roughly 2,000 of those counties, the Democratic Party has no real consequential presence. And I think that we can get there by having people show up and say, okay, I'm ready. I've had enough. I want to be part of the solution. You were going to say something?
I 100% agree with you. I know Keith Ellis is going to, I hopefully do that, and hopefully that will happen. But what I'm seeing is that we have to get moving, because 2018 is right upon us, and we don't have any candidates. We don't have any, our bench is just not there. And I want us to win, because this stuff with Trump is not a good thing.
Yeah. No, I think 2018 is going to be a very, very interesting year. And I absolutely agree, Paul. We need to be building the infrastructure. We need to be building the capability. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. Dave in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Tom, yeah, I'm very concerned about most of Donald Trump's cabinet picks, but, they all seem to be contrary to the very agencies that they're going to be in charge of.
Well, that's the whole point. That's what Reagan did, too, when he put Ann Gorsuch in charge of the EPA. Yeah. Her job was to dismantle it. She cut its budget by a third.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think the one that could do the most long-term damage would be Scott Pruitt.
Yeah.
For the EPA pick. He sued the EPA 14 different times. I don't know if he's got any active lawsuits, but
he does.
Would that make him a plaintiff and a defendant at the same time? I don't know.
I'm guessing he would drop the lawsuits before he took over the agency. But
he's taken $300,000 in contributions from the fossil fuel industry in his state. He's rejected scientific evidence on a lot of issues, including mercury pollution, industrial farm runoff in rivers and streams, and CO2-driven global warming. He's
right.
All the other picks, all the stuff that's going on, it isn't going to matter much on a dead planet. Yep. And, the United States needs to be leading in this, in the world. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world does if we don't get involved. And this could really set us back a long time.
Yeah, Scott Pruitt is about as bad as they come. I mean, just a completely sold-out shill to the fossil fuel industry. And who has demonstrated that over and over again through his behaviors and the positions he's taken. And I think he would be even worse than Ann Gorsuch. And she arguably was the worst EPA administrator in the history of the agency. I mean, so bad that Reagan himself had to pull her. Right? I mean, that's how bad it was. So, Dave, thanks for the call. We'll see where this goes. But yeah, I agree. Scott Pruitt. And now, by the way, the Republicans have done away with the quorum rules in the Senate for the committees. So the committees this morning just passed a number of people, including Price and Sessions. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So we're talking about Judge Neil Gorsuch and probably his most famous decision was Hobby Lobby. Now, he wasn't on the Supreme Court for it, but he was on the 10th Circuit, which kicked it up to the Supreme Court. And he was part of the majority, or actually, I don't know if it was majority or minority, but whatever it was, he ended up on the side of the Supreme Court saying that Hobby Lobby is a corporation. Corporations are persons under the law. A person can have a religion, and the Constitution guarantees that persons can act on their religious beliefs without interference from the government. And therefore, if a corporation decides that it's Catholic and it doesn't want, or fundamentalist Protestant, and doesn't want its female employees to have birth control paid for by the government, then that corporation can challenge the Affordable Care Act, which is what Hobby Lobby was. And and Gorsuch was the guy who pushed that narrative. So he's a big believer in corporate personhood, and which is really troubling. And apparently, a big believer in this is what's so weird about the Hobby Lobby thing. The Hobby Lobby folks, the family, I think it was the Green family, was with an E on the end, that owned Hobby Lobby. They had been providing health insurance, which paid for contraception, to their female employees for years. Never said a word about it. They paid for the insurance that paid for the birth control pills for their female employees. And then Obamacare came along and said health insurance companies have to provide contraception and not consider being female a pre-existing condition. In other words, not charge more for it. So Hobby Lobby had been paying, they've been paying slightly more for their female employees than for their male employees because those female employees had the pre-existing condition of being female. And therefore, there are ongoing expenses associated with being female, like birth control pills, which about a quarter of the people who take birth control pills don't even take them for contraception. They just take them to regulate their periods and things. And they've been paid for this, but as soon as Obamacare came along, it was like, oh my God, we can't go along with this. And they weren't even using Obamacare. It was just, this was part of the regulations of Obamacare, saying that the health insurance companies couldn't discriminate. And they were like, but we want them to be able to discriminate. So, and he also, Judge Gorsuch has said that liberals turn to the courts rather than the legislature to achieve policy goals. He has referred to liberals as being addicted to the courtroom. Right. As in what? Brown versus Board? Roe v. Wade? Well, yeah, obviously. He also wrote a 2000 Law Journal article. This is from Victoria Jones's newsletter. He wrote a 2000 Law Journal article and a 2006 books arguing strongly against assisted suicide laws. And this is one that's, you've got 6 states now where death with dignity is legal, where if a person is dying and they don't want to go through or put their family through an insanely painful and debilitating end, they can end it themselves gently, safely, at home with their family around them, no doc in sight. And I remember the stories, on physician-assisted suicide that I was hearing from people when we, in Oregon when this was being debated. And so often people would call and say, when I got the prescription, I thought, okay, that's it, I'm going to kill myself. And then I decided, I can go one more day because I've got the bottle sitting right next to the bed here. Anytime I want, I can just leave. And what they found, what the experience in Oregon was what they found was that fewer people were committing suicide, and they weren't doing it in messy ways like they had before. Before, people were in a panic. Oh my God, I'm about to lose my functions. I'm about to, I'm close to the point where, whatever the horrible thing may be, and the pain is getting so, and so they just, they take a gun and blow their brains out and make a horrible mess. And everybody feels terrible. And you can't bring your family around you and say, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, goodbye, everybody, and then blow your brains all over everybody. You can't do that. And so, these laws are at risk. Obviously, the whole contraception thing, this was Donald Trump doubling down on his promise to say his litmus test was, will you overturn Roe v. Wade? And it was amazing last night to watch all the commentators on various networks trying to basically spin it like, well, he's kind of a centrist guy, and we really don't know, and, where does he stand? Actually, we do know. And he's not a centrist guy. And he is a Scalia, and Scalia was no centrist. Scalia was one of the most right-wing crazies that has been on the Supreme Court, certainly in my lifetime.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And of course, it's just another Scalia. I don't want him. And like I said, John McCain said, hey, we could filibuster for 4 years if Hillary gets elected. Maybe we should do that. Paul Krugman says that, yes, the white working class is about to be betrayed. The evidence of that coming betrayal is obvious in the choice of an array of pro-corporate, anti-labor figures for particular positions, key positions. In particular, the most important story of the week, seriously, people, stop focusing on Trump's Twitter, was the selection of Tom Price, an ardent opponent of Obamacare and advocate of Medicare privatization as Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services. This choice probably means that the Affordable Care Act is doomed, and Mr. Trump's most enthusiastic supporters will be among the biggest losers. Yes. And then he says, the first thing you need to understand here is that Republican talk of repeal and replace has always been a fraud. The GOP has had 6 years claiming it'll come up with a replacement for Obamacare any day now. The reason why it hasn't delivered is because it can't. Now, let me add to this. The reason why the Republicans have not been able to offer an alternative to Obamacare is because Obamacare was the original Republican plan. This is what Richard Nixon proposed in 1972, back when we had real news in the United States. And Teddy Kennedy fought. And then the Heritage Foundation in the early 1980s, at the beginning of the Reagan administration, I believe it was, came out with a working paper on this and said, here's how to do it. Mitt Romney tried it in Massachusetts, and it was relatively successful. He tried it in 2000. He ran for president on it in 2004, or he intended to. By that time, though, Obamacare had passed and it had become radioactive, and so he was trying to, oh no, I didn't do that, you know, but he did. I mean, it was that's the Republican program. The Democratic program is Medicare. Give Medicare to everybody. But the Democratic program couldn't get through, given the current Congress we had. So this is what President Obama put together, was basically the Republican program. Speaking of when we actually had news in this country, have you heard anybody breaking down any of these pieces of legislation lately? Back in 1972, when Richard Nixon proposed Obamacare, Daniel Schorr went on CBS News. Daniel Schorr has since passed away. Lamar and I had a wonderful lunch with him here in Washington, D.C. back, 20 years ago when we were writing our first book on the JFK assassination. Daniel Schorr had some fascinating information for us. What an amazing guy and a great journalist. But this is how journalism used to be done in the United States. This is a clip from CBS back from the day. You can find this floating around YouTube. Here it is.
The administration proposal would provide different plans for 4 categories of Americans. For 150 million working people and their families, employers would be required to buy health insurance providing a basic package of benefits, eventually they paying 3/4 of the premiums.
This is number
For some
one.
20 million of the working poor and their families, the current free Medicaid services would be replaced by private health insurance fully paid by the government for the poorest, with a sliding scale of contributions for families earning more than $3,000.
That's number two, the second part of it.
For the 21 million aging Americans, the $5.60 monthly Medicare premium for optional doctor services would be dropped. Social Security taxes adjusted to make up the cost.
That's part 3.
For some 30 million domestic, self-employed, and others, lower costs by being enabled to buy policies at group rates from insurance pools.
Sound like Obamacare?
Deductions, co-insurance features. The plan is estimated to cover less than half of the average patient's health expenses and to cost the federal government less than $2 billion in addition to what it's now paying. By contrast, the Kennedy plan would cover an estimated 70% of health expenses through a system that would cost the government up to $60 billion, but including a lot of what patients are now paying. The Kennedy bill is straight national health insurance, financed by Social Security
the Kennedy
and
bill was
general
single-payer
taxes,
health insurance.
with no cost sharing, no cutoff point for the beneficiaries, bypassing private insurance companies, operating through a presidentially appointed health security board. And so the line is being drawn between repairs on the present health system and a new federal health system. The debate starts next Monday, when Welfare Secretary Richardson is scheduled to appear at the opening of hearings of the Senate Health Subcommittee. The chairman of that subcommittee now, Senator Kennedy.
There you go. And then he goes to Kennedy and he gives a speech. And there's another one out there too where Walter Cronkite is breaking the thing down. I mean, there's a couple of them where they're breaking it down because that's what news used to do. And then in the 80s, during the Reagan administration, keep in mind this was 72, and then in the 1980s during the Reagan administration, whenever any news media came out and said, hey, yeah, Ronald Reagan just lied to you. You know, these are not facts. Things like that, then you had this whole media infrastructure that was funded by these very, very wealthy families, by the Coors family and by the Bradley Foundation, the Bradley family. And, a lot of them now, they're just foundations because the founders are dead, but they were live, live and kicking back then. And they were funding groups like, Brent Bozell's group, which I think was ACT, something like that, Accuracy in Media, AIM, A-I-M. And they would just yell and scream, oh, my God, Daniel Schorr, how dare he, blah, blah, blah. And this was a strategy that was called working the refs. You work the referees. You hassle the referees to the point where they just finally give in and say, all right already. And that's what our media did, is they said, all right already. We're tired of fighting with you right-wingers about what's factual and what's not. We'll just stop talking about facts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, Chuck Schumer's saying, we're going to filibuster this thing. It's going to take 60 votes. That, on the one hand, it's a reasonable statement. On the other hand, it's not, we're not even going to hold a hearing. But on the third hand, as it were, the Democrats don't control the Senate. So, the decision to hold hearings or not. I mean, this morning, Tom Price and let's see, I think maybe it was Mnuchin, and there was like 3 of them got pushed through this morning. Jeff Sessions, that's right. Thank you, Troy. And Jeff Sessions got, and Democrats were boycotting these meetings because these guys, Mnuchin apparently lied again to the committee, saying, no, we weren't doing robo-signing back when we were foreclosing all those people. And it turns out, they were doing the robo-signing. And it's pretty amazing. So anyhow, Kevin in Bound Brook, New Jersey. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, what's up?
On the air?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Okay, just checking. So I know we're talking about the Supreme Court nominee, and I know that's very important, but I believe there's a much more pressing issue that we should discuss.
Okay.
Based on what Donald Trump has already done very early into his presidency, from the Muslim ban to appointing Steve Bannon inside his administration and on the National Security Council, and for his gross conflicts of interest, I believe it is our constitutional duty to call all of our senators and representatives and demand the impeachment of the President of the United States.
Yeah. And then you're going to have Mike Pence.
Yeah, I know that, but this guy's crazy, and he clearly has zero contempt for the law. He has zero respect for the law.
Right. Well, Mike Pence doesn't have much more. That's the problem. It's Mike Pence is an ends justify the means Republican.
I very much understand what you're saying, and I get the argument against it, but
right. But that said, Mike Pence is not the authoritarian, or maybe he is, but he's not as competent an authoritarian as Donald Trump is. And so, he may not do as much damage in terms of turning America into a fascist country. On the other hand, I think he'll do just as much damage, and well, I was going to say perhaps more, but it's fairly clear, by choosing Gorsuch and so many other things that Trump has done, that he's just dancing to the tune of the right-wing evangelicals. It's an important part of the Republican base, and he's not going to leave them behind. He's going to give them whatever they want. But it's, impeachment is a really, really, really high bar. I mean, when they impeached Nixon, it was a majority of Republicans who wanted to impeach Nixon, in addition to Democrats.
Well, on top of that, Tom, even if it doesn't work, at the very least, if people do flood their office with calls saying we believe the president should be impeached, if people are protesting saying,
Maxine Waters and a half a dozen other members held a press conference on this yesterday, as I recall. Might have been the day before, but I'm pretty sure it was yesterday, in which they were talking. No, in fact, now that I think about it, I think it was Monday. But in any case, they were talking about they submitted legislation to do an investigation into whether or not there was Russian involvement in the election. But as peripheral to that, or on the side of that, they basically said, if so, we think this, or the argument was made. I don't want to put words in Maxine Waters' mouth without the paper in front of me, but words to the effect of that this, could constitute an impeachable offense. We'll see. But you've got to have more than just he's not releasing his tax returns. And now that he owns the federal bureaucracy, I keep waiting for, the lease that he's got on the D.C. hotel says that no profits from this hotel can be accrued to any elected official. And there he is sitting in the White House, and there's the hotel sitting 5 blocks away. And I don't get it. but it's like he controls the executive branch right now. So rules, we don't need no stinking rules. Anyhow, Kevin, thank you for the call. Chris in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Hi. I wanted to talk about the idea of death with dignity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not opposed to hospice, okay? I'm pro-choice. But I have been through an experience, and I believe that we have some serious problems in our laws allowing hospice. I think that families think that they're protected, and patients think that they're protected with the documents that they have. I know in my family there was a power of attorney. There was a power of attorney for health care, financial, and also a living will. And these documents were rewritten because they supposedly couldn't be found. I don't want to get into too much detail about who I'm speaking about, but I just want people to understand that they really have to be careful with their family members and who has the power of attorney over them.
Right.
Because I believe that people can very easily be taken for everything that they own and put in hospice in very easy ways. Our laws they have such holes in them you could drive a truck through them.
Yeah.
I have tried contacting authorities and speaking to people, and to get somebody to follow up on these issues, you have to really accuse people that are family members of actually, murdering somebody or stealing from them. You cannot really get.
Yeah. So the bottom line here, Chris, is make sure you know where your papers are, and if you live in a death with dignity state, it all changes. Chris, thank you for sharing your experience. Sharon in Crescent City, California, you wanted to talk about death with dignity?
Yes. I've had experience. I'm a retired social worker at a skilled nursing facility, and I've had experience firsthand with people who are dying, and the pain and the people pleading to shoot them, and even the staff at the skilled the skilled nursing facility saying, if I ever get to this place, shoot me.
Right.
It's like, the pain is just, I had a dog who was for 17 years, a mini poodle. I had to finally put him to sleep, which is the most painful thing I had to do, but it was for dignity, for quality of his life.
Out of love.
What?
It's out of love.
It was out of love. Yes, out of love. And I see what the other caller was talking about, how families can come in, and the pulse, the pink sheet of paper that you have your doctor sign, and you make your choice. If you put that up on your refrigerator, that can help when it comes down to, when families are trying to say, no, we want them to stay alive. And if the patient
just make sure you know where your paperwork is. Yeah, excellent point. Sharon, thank you for the call. Jay in Fullerton, California. Hey, Jay, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Good morning.
Hey.
Hey, just a question, a simple question. Since Scalia died, there have been two nominees for the Supreme Court put up by the President of the United States.
Right, Merrick Garland and
what
Neil
gives
Gorsuch.
what gives them the right to just not even have a no vote on the first one and just move on to the second?
They can do
procedural.
Well, Mitch McConnell is asserting that he can basically do whatever he wants, and so far he's gotten away with it. So this goes back to that question that Spencer Roane, the Supreme Court Justice of Virginia, asked Thomas Jefferson. If the Supreme Court is not the ultimate authority in the land, who is? And Jefferson replied, the people themselves. This is a political problem, Jay, and it's going to have to be handled at a political level, which means political organizing, which means voting the bums out, which means taking back, the reins of power in Washington, D.C.
So the Democrats should probably say, okay, yeah, we'll vote on the Supreme Court pick. We're going to vote on Garland first. And if we vote him down, okay, we'll consider the new guy.
They could try, but Garland's I don't know what the word is. Garland's offering, for the Supreme Court, Garland's appointment expired when President Obama's term expired on January 20th. So it's no longer in play. That's why I was saying they could take the exact number of days that it has been, that Garland, or from the time Scalia died until the time this new guy was proposed. Take that number of days and say, come back and talk to us in 335 days or whatever it is, as one possibility, which would be a way of saying, what you did was not right. And so here, we're going to just hand it back to you. We're not going to punish you beyond that. We're not going to do this for 4 years like John McCain suggested back in 2016 if Hillary was elected president, that the Republicans should just filibuster the Supreme Court for 4 years. We're not going to do that. But, we'll see how this plays out. Jay, thank you very much for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Bottom line here is that the Democrats basically don't have the power to do anything. If Mitch McConnell decides to change the Senate rules and blow up the filibuster, it's over. And welcome back. Tom, watching Free Speech TV in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for getting me in. The reason I'm calling is about a story that was reported in The Guardian back on January 19th concerning a bill introduced by Shevitz of, I believe, Utah, selling off 3.3 million acres of federal land to private interests for basically raping resources from this property.
Right.
And more generally, the Republican Party behind closed doors is trying to get rid of 650 million acres of federal land and ceding it to the states so they can basically do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with this. We've talked about it before in this program, and it's a crime. I mean, it's reversing everything Teddy Roosevelt stood for. But hey, if there's something that the federal government owns, if there's something that we the people own that can be turned into a profit center for a Republican donor, let's do it as fast as we can. I mean, that's kind of the Republican mantra.
But where is the money going? Because in the story, it was reported that there was no money to be made for the American public, which I'm assuming federal land is taxpayer land. We own that land.
Yeah, it is, and it'll be sold. It's just that it'll be sold on for pennies on the dollar. James Watt was doing this during the Reagan administration, and it's and doing it terribly. I mean, he got a lot of the two people who got the most flack during the Reagan administration were Ann Gorsuch running the EPA and James Watt running Interior. I mean, they were put there to destroy those agencies, and arguably Bill Bennett with education, although Bill Bennett was pretty ineffective. And Watt and Gorsuch were quite effective during the first couple of years of the Reagan administration, which we're seeing a replay of right now with the so-called Trump administration. And I think it's terrible, Tom. I absolutely.
So all we can do is get on the phone and start making phone calls. I mean, we got to get the news out there. You're have to get on the phone and start calling these congressmen.
Well, and not only that, you're going to have to call Republican congressmen and say, what happened to Teddy Roosevelt? What happened to the Republican ideal of setting aside federal land for the public good? It's going to take a lot of pressure. And, I'm not real optimistic about it. These guys, they've got power now, and they've got power, by virtue of the hundreds of millions of dollars that the Koch network has spent, the hundreds of millions of dollars that other billionaires and big corporations have thrown in. And all of that is because the Supreme Court legalized it. And these guys want to keep that court. You see, if the court were to flip progressive, it might overturn Citizens United. If the court overturned Citizens United, then the Republicans wouldn't be able to easily get money from billionaires anymore, which puts the Republicans standing on the outside looking in. They are defending their money pot. And make no mistake, that's one of the major things that's going on here. And the people who want to buy politicians, from the Koch network to others, they're doing everything they can to make sure that the Republicans, find people who are going to uphold Citizens United. I mean, this is why I said, my main concern about Garland is that in the Hobby Lobby decision, he said, yes, corporations are people and they can have a religion. And that's crazy, but that's, half of Citizens United is corporations are people. The other half is, and money is speech. And which to the best of my knowledge, he has not ruled on, but, it's reasonable to assume that he's right there with Scalia and everybody else, that corporations and billionaires should really be the ones running the show. Thom, thank you for the call. I share your alarm. There's so much. There is so much. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dwight in Los Angeles. Hey, Dwight, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning. I would like to talk about the Supreme Court nomination and just an observation. When we bring these judges up to the Supreme Court, 9 times out of 10, they are federal judges. And they have already been what we would call vetted as far as the nomination through the presidents and so forth.
Right.
I think that we should have patience. I think that the people that we nominate does have integrity and do have conscience. Even though it seems like maybe they're a little bit slanted toward, their own self-interest, I think that their conscience and the responsibility of them being a Supreme Court judge will overrule anything, and they will live up to.
Well, Dwight, we haven't seen that with Scalia or Thomas, for example, who were, giving speeches and going on hunting trips with the Kochs and other people in their networks, taking honorariums, violating the federal code of judicial ethics left and right. I mean, Scalia went hunting with Dick Cheney 3 weeks before Dick Cheney's case before the Supreme Court was decided. And Scalia did not recuse himself. There is a history of the hyper-conservatives on this court actually behaving in ways that are not ethical and that are not honest and that are not straightforward. And so I think that, we have to, the conservative mantra increasingly is the ends justify the means. It doesn't matter what we have to do to get what we want. We're just going to get what we want. And I think that that's just wrong. Dwight, thank you for the call. I get it. You want to give Trump a chance, but I'm not interested. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, sure. Yeah, I'm torn on this, on whether or not to just block everything that Trump's trying to do. On one hand, you want to always kind of be the bigger people, show that we're better than them, that we can hold our own, without getting dirty. But I'm thinking the Republicans, they shut down the government. They did all of this ridiculous stuff just to block President Obama's initiatives, and they still it just seemed like they got more popular. So as much as I would love to say, like, we should just go ahead and, have a vote and, vote in these justices and give them a chance. I just don't think that that's going to be in our interest. I'm almost at to deny Trump anything that we can and fight with all of our might to prevent him from getting any of this stuff done. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where we should stand on this. But
yeah, no, I don't disagree, Marty, and I think that just saying everything is going to require, just exactly what the Republicans did over the last 8 years. Everything is going to require 60 votes, and if Mitch McConnell changes the rules, then it's going to be done over our protest. It's that simple. And although I realize that there are a few senators who are from states that were overwhelmingly carried in the last election by Donald Trump, and prior to that were overwhelmingly carried by Mitt Romney and John McCain. In other words, basically red states, and these are Democratic senators, and they're having to walk a very, very narrow line. And I would not want to be in their shoes. I get what's going on because they're caught between the activists on the left and people just and Democrats. I mean, even old school mainstream. You heard Chuck Schumer this morning on this program. The Democrats, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, an electorate that is relatively independent and Republican leaning. And the problem that so many of these guys are facing, and frankly, the thing that got us where we are right now, is that 90% of the media structure in the United States is Republican tilting. Right-wing hate radio is on thousands of radio stations all over the United States. Fox News is 24/7 Republican-only propaganda channel, and there's nothing like that on the left. There's no left, lefty channel. I mean, there's Free Speech TV, but they're not in every home in America like Fox News is. And they're on Sirius, they're on Dish and Direct and a lot of cable stations, but it's not not close to every home in America. So the bottom line is that there's this incredible right-wing infrastructure that has been built up over, since Lewis Powell wrote the Powell Memo in '71, exactly what he called for, by the way, that have used Lewis Powell's 1976 Buckley Supreme Court decision, which said the money is speech, to build these institutions and to buy these members of Congress, and they now have that power. And we're right at the edge of this incredible takeover of America by the billionaire class, and to the point where we elected a billionaire as president, and he's got enough billionaires in his cabinet that they have more wealth than about a third of America. Just the people in his cabinet room. It's really astonishing when you think about it. So, yes, we've got to fight, but we have to organize. We need to be planning for 2018. We need to be planning for 2020. We need to get on the ground. We need to get inside the Democratic Party. We need to get inside the media. We need to be doing all of these things all at once. Marty, thank you for the call. Arvin in Atlanta. Hey, Arvin, what's on your mind?
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about the Supreme Court nomination. I've been hearing a lot about how red state Democratic senators who are up for re-election in 2018 may feel pressure to vote for Gorsuch. And first of all, I don't understand how that's going to help them, because they're still going to get voted out. It's not like Republicans are going to say, oh, well, you voted for Gorsuch, so I'm going to save you.
Right.
So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't know how to strategize that out, Arvin. And in fact, I saw a little clip this morning of Joe Manchin on Joe Scarborough's TV program, and Joe Manchin was basically saying, if they fire me, they fire me. My constituents. He's up for re-election in 2 years, and which I thought was like kind of sad and defeatist. He's a decent guy, but like I said, he's walking this tightrope, and what do you do in that situation? I'm not sure. I mean, go take a lobbyist job for $5 million a year. I mean, there are worse things, I suppose, but I don't have a strategy for those guys, other than mobilizing the progressive base inside their state, and most of them many of them have taken positions that are not going to activate the progressive base in their state, and they're having to deal with a state where most of the people are getting their information from Fox News and right-wing hate radio, and don't ever hear anything positive about their Democratic Senate members, and so they just find themselves in this horrible bind. I mean, do you have a suggestion, Arvin?
Well, I think if you're in a position where you're going to be losing your seat either way, like somebody like Heidi Heitkamp, if she's in a red state, if she's going to lose her seat either way, then you might as well do the right thing and risk it.
That would be my inclination if I was that senator. But I started out as a progressive, and what has happened is in some of these states, Democrats have recruited people who specifically weren't progressives because they didn't think that a progressive could win in that state. Now, I personally think that's a mistaken strategy. Bernie Sanders won in the primaries. Bernie Sanders won West Virginia by as I recall, by about 20 points. I mean, a substantial win in West Virginia. I think that a genuine progressive actually has a really good chance in West Virginia. But, that's not Joe Manchin. And, which is not to knock Joe. I mean, it's a Democratic vote in the Senate, and we need as many of those as we can get. So, I don't want us to turn into the circular firing squad. We have to acknowledge all these realities. And this is why the Democratic Party needs, and the DNC needs a chair, and why it needs a lot more people involved with it. Arvin, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction. This is from Chapter 4. It's titled The Clathrate Gun. The deepest place on Earth, the deepest part of our oceans, is a massive canyon in the West Pacific called the Mariana Trench. More than 35,000 feet deep, the pressure of the water is 1,000 times that of the surface of the ocean. At that depth, a normal submarine would collapse like a paper bag. There's very little life there, and what does live is adapted to cold, pressure, and darkness like nowhere else on Earth. The first man to dive solo to the bottom of the Mariana Trench was filmmaker James Cameron. A lay expert on the oceans, in part from his work making the movie Titanic, Cameron designed, funded, built, and in 2012 navigated his own submarine, the Deep Sea Challenger, into these icy depths. To say that James Cameron understands the ocean in a way that few other human beings ever could would be an understatement. From shallow dives to the deepest place on Earth, he knows the seas, and he knows about their methane clathrates. As he told me earlier this year, quote, "The bottom line is that given the number of species expected to die off in the next century just due to climate change and the other effects of our industrial civilization, we are already in the middle of a mass extinction event equivalent to the lesser ones in paleo history, such as the KT extinction that took out the dinosaurs. So the Homo sapien isn't a species that's currently endangered. However, the clathrate gun scenario, James Cameron said, changes that. It doubles down on an already bad situation, putting us on the hit list as well. Not literally, because some people probably will survive in highly artificial environments, meaning the species will perish, but the vast majority of humanity will perish." Cameron added, with a metaphor worthy of his brilliant Avatar movies, "We're talking about the survival of our kids. We collectively are playing Russian roulette. We're putting a gun to their heads and going click, 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 a clathrate gun." Only discovered in the serious way in the 1960s, there is so much methane in the form of clathrates, such as the frozen methane slurry on the floor of the continental shelves around the oceans of the world, that it's at least double all the known underground coal, oil, and gas on the entire planet. Peter Ward, the paleontologist at the University of Bristol, told me, quote, "Methane is way worse than carbon dioxide. It's inert right now in the soil. It's not affecting anyone in any way. When you warm it, though, it becomes a gas, and then it starts acting immediately as a greenhouse gas. So this is an immediate and very short-term threat to human civilization." For the last decade, a joint U.S.-Russia research team out of the International Arctic Research Center at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, has been exploring the East Siberian Sea. Arctic. They are looking at the bottom of the seafloor where once stable reserves of frozen methane have begun thawing and bubbling up into the atmosphere. Dr. Igor Semeletov told the research team in 2011. He told the British newspaper, The Independent, about what he found that year and the scope of the impending methane problem. Quote, "Earlier, we found torch-like structures like this, but they were only tens of meters in diameter. This is the first time that we found continuous, powerful, and impressive seeping structures more than 1,000 meters in diameter. It's amazing," end of quote. Amazing academically, that is. Horrifying for those of us who call planet Earth home. 1,000 meters is a kilometer, so this is one massive single methane leak, and it's a bit more than a half-mile in diameter. And it is just one of many. Dr. Smeletov added, quote,
I was most impressed by the sheer scale and high density of the plumes. Over a relatively small area, we found more than 100, but over a wider area, there should be thousands of them, end quote. Those sites would have been familiar during the Permian and other extinctions as well. As Paul Wignall explained to me, the significant thing about methane is it's a very effective greenhouse gas, so it causes global warming. Once you trigger warming, if you release methane, it's in positive feedback. It gets warmer and warmer as you release more methane into the atmosphere. So we think of this as a big part of the Permian extinction at that time. This is very rapid warming. Charles Dickens, who had proposed the methane link to the Permian mass extinction, told me, "We know that in the bottom of the seafloor, large parts of the ocean margins have methane in a solid phase. And what happens when you change the temperature, it can melt this frozen methane phase." He added, "The idea is that during some of these extinction events, we have some triggering that forces the ocean temperatures to warm, and then that melts the solid methane phase, which turns into gas and goes into the oceans and atmosphere." Paleontologist Michael Benton concluded, quote, "The risk is runaway greenhouse, which is when the self-correcting mechanisms cease to kick in, and you heat by a little bit and you release methane. That then causes excess heating and you release more methane, and so it goes on. It's believed at the end of the Permian 250 million years ago, this kind of runaway greenhouse gas exacerbated the effect, making it, the Permian mass extinction, an awful lot worse. By 2010, it was said that 8 million tons of methane emissions were being released into the atmosphere every year, but researchers believe that too is an underestimate. More recent studies have shown a far more rapid increase in methane, CH4 concentration in the atmospheres. In the last 2 centuries, the amount of methane in the atmosphere has increased from 0.7 ppm to 1.7 ppm. That's the largest known increase in the history of the planet. The book, The Last Hours of Humanity.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back, Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm very pleased to have in the studio. Actually, before I get to that, first of all, and I should have opened the first hour with this. I want to say welcome to our newest radio affiliate, airing the Thom Hartmann Program, starting today. WRFI in upstate New York. You can find them on the dial at 88.1 FM in Ithaca and 91.9 FM in Watkins Glen. And a shout out to Roger Smith, WRFI's Development Program Advisory Committee and the on-air staff. Thank you all for putting us on the air on your station. We're really pleased to be there and hope you're having a good time with our show. So that said, in the studio with me is Sarah Van Gelder, the co-founder and editor at large, of Yes Magazine, and author of the new book. Where'd it go? Here it is, right here. Oh, there it is on the screen too. The Revolution Where You Live, stories from a 12,000-mile journey through America. You can read about it at yesmagazine.org. You can tweet her at Sarah Van Gelder. Sarah, welcome to the program. Welcome back, actually.
Yeah,
you've been on the program before.
Yes.
It's great having you with us. So, geez, a 12,000-mile journey through America. That sounds like fun, actually.
It was.
So
4 months on the road in a little camper and a pickup truck and visited places I'd never been to before.
What did you learn?
I learned how much people love where they live, that people have this deep connection to their place, whether it's an urban neighborhood or it's a ranch in Montana, and they're willing to do a lot to protect it. So I learned about a kind of power that people have in their communities that I think is an untapped source of resistance in this era, in this Trump era, and an untapped source of creativity to create the kind of world that people actually want.
Are you familiar with Tom Lindsay and his work at the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, CELDEF?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He is doing that. I mean,
That's right.
he's going into rural communities that are about to get whacked with anything from fracking to a hog farm and helping them pass local ordinances to keep those guys out. I mean, it's
That's right.
It's pretty impressive. I mean, it just seems like, I was talking to Larry Cohen the other day, the president of ourrevolution.com, Bernie's, the heir to Bernie's candidacy or campaign. And he said, there's, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's in the neighborhood of 3,200 counties in the United States. And in a little over 2,000 of those counties, the Democratic Party functionally does not have a presence. And, in probably 1,000 of them, they're not even putting up candidates. And it's like, we've got to turn this thing around. And I think that that, local control of your economy and pushing back against the big toxic polluters and everything. It seems like a starting point, isn't it?
Oh, that's right. And what I found is so many different communities have their own starting points. In some cases, it's that pushback against a pipeline or a coal mine. In other places, it's people saying, we need a new economy and we're going to build it ourselves. In other cases, it's people who are running for office and winning. Mm-hmm. So it's all of the above, and I think each community has a somewhat different take on that. But certainly, the notion that we can run for those local offices and win, and then move up the chain is really important, and that we have our own independent political organization, not reliant on the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party does tend to let us down and does tend to disappear in between elections.
Well, I think we need to do both. We need to strengthen and become the Democratic Party, frankly, and stop this. Let's go back to sleep between the elections and build an outside movement. Is that not unreasonable?
No, I think that's right. And we have to hold those elected officials accountable and not just look to them to do the right thing, because they're going to be followers, not leaders.
So, I looked at the map, and there's a lot of great pictures in your book and this map of your trip, and you traveled through a lot of areas that frankly were carried by Donald Trump or were close to being carried by Donald Trump in the last election. And Republicans, what do you think was unique about them that causes them to, that caused them to be Democratic 30 years ago and causes them to be Republican now? I mean, we all know that the big flip that happened in 64, 65 through 67, basically, all the changes in civil rights laws and things, motivated a lot of Southern Democrats, white Southern Democrats, to become Republicans. And certainly Richard Nixon and then Ronald Reagan even more effectively after that did the Southern strategy to pull those people in. But aside from racism, just naked racism, what else is there?
Well, I think it's a sense of economic exclusion. I think people are living in parts of the country that have been suffering for a very long time. The middle class has been in this stagnation mode. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton kept talking about how great the economy is doing. And I think people felt like, there's a disconnect here. I don't feel great. I'm in debt. My kids can't go to college. My healthcare premiums are going up. One thing after another. It just doesn't feel to people that I talk to.
This is why both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders overwhelmingly won West Virginia, for example.
Exactly. It's an outsider strategy. It's saying, this coalition between big corporations and big government with their own insider idea about what's good isn't working for me. I heard that over and over again, and I think people could have gone for Bernie Sanders because he did have that outsider perspective. Yeah. And if they had a choice between an insider and outsider, a lot of people were just willing to go with Trump because they were so fed up.
Well, I think that's been the case since 2000, frankly, and that was Barack Obama's appeal, was that he presented himself as an outsider, actually in both elections, and although he turned around the economy and he prevented us from going totally crazy for 8 years. It's although so much of what he wanted to do was just blocked by the Republicans. We're talking with Sarah Van Gelder, her new book, The Revolution Where You Live, Stories from a 12,000-Mile Journey Through New America. You also wrote a piece recently for Yes Magazine called Big Protests Are Fine, but Here's a To-Do List for Lasting Change. Are those the things that we've been talking about, or are there other things that you would suggest?
They're related to that. I think that the kind of transformation that we need goes far deeper than just electing Democrats into office. I think we need to take on big questions like the climate crisis. We need to take on racism at a much deeper level. We need to take on inequality that's so pervasive and what continued to be a problem under Obama, although he did, I think, what he could. So we need to take those on, and some of those issues we can take on best in our communities. The article you're talking about, I was inspired to write after the election because I think there's so much we have to do now at a local level to keep things from getting worse. I think fascism thrives when people are afraid and when they close their doors and go inside, and we have to do the opposite. We need to be there for each other, just as we were in the Women's March, just as so many people are at the airports. We need to be showing up in person wherever we are and connecting with each other. And one of the amazing things that happens when we do that connection is that people get a sense of joy and a sense of empowerment, and they say, oh, we don't have to let ourselves just get beaten down. We can actually meet up with our peeps and make the good things happen where we are. So from that from that foundation of reconnection, I think we're much more powerful at resistance, which is my second R, because we have so much we're going to need to be resisting now. And from there, we can also be doing the revitalization in our communities. We don't have to lose our dreams for beautiful solutions where we live. We can keep making those happen when we succeed in reconnecting and resisting.
That's marvelous and very, very well said. Sarah Van Gelder, the book Revolution Where You Are. She is also the co-founder of Yes Magazine. The book has a foreword by Danny Glover, by the way. And she's also the editor-at-large at Yes Magazine. YesMagazine.org is the website, and you can tweet her at Sarah Van Gelder. Sarah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to be telling more stories at Politics and Prose tonight in Washington, D.C.
Great. If you're in D.C., come to Politics and Prose.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls and the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Magnus in Vinalhaven, Maine. Am I saying all that right? Watching Free Speech TV?
It's Vinyl Haven, Maine.
Vinyl Haven. Okay, great. The home of, as in the home of vinyl.
Yep. Vinyl's a family.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
So what's up, Magnus?
Well, I'm an organizer. I started the Lobstermen's Union, and I'm staring at a brick wall. I can't see a crack through it. If this cross-check thing and the way these guys have been ripping us off keeps going on, I don't see a sense in even having elections.
Yeah.
I think we have to attack that first because, I'm a numbers guy, and it was terrible. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. How they, the cross-check just took it, and there's not a word.
Yeah.
And I really think we need to emphasize about that.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree at all. And I think but that said, one of the other things that's fairly predictable about these hardcore right-wingers, and we saw this during the Reagan administration. Keep in mind, Ronald Reagan, if the Democrats had been a little more aggressive and a little wiser to the ways things were going, there's so much that they could have done with this. The Reagan administration had more people in his senior administration positions convicted of felonies than any other administration in the history of the United States. It was the most corrupt administration in history, from Ann Gorsuch to James Watt to the whole bunch of them, right? And even arguably worse than Nixon. It's particularly when you include Iran-Contra and you include the 1980 deal to hold the hostages, that was done by Bill Casey, his campaign manager, during the campaign in 1980. And so in the process of overreaching, as they always do, they very often just crash things, destroy things. And it's a terrible thing, I suppose, to not even hope is the wrong word, but to suggest or think that, maybe our salvation, for lack of a better word, will come as a result of the Republicans ruining things. But that's historically what has happened. That's
painful.
Pardon?
That's painful to go that way.
Yeah, it is. It really is, and it's not a way that we want to go. But Magnus, excellent point. Thanks a lot for the call. Sarah in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Sarah, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I need your opinion on something.
Mm-hmm.
With all the new appointments, and especially, Jeff Sessions today, he and with they're only being 2 states away from redoing our Constitution. That's frightening to me. It really concerns me that
it's a big deal.
Freedom. Yeah. It's a huge deal, and if they take away our freedom to protest peacefully, our freedom of speech, what's going to happen to you and Stephanie and our beacons of hope?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that we're at risk, but we've already seen this. This was the change in media ownership rules and things like that have led to an enormous consolidation of media, and frankly, I think independent media is. I'm with Thomas Jefferson. Independent media is what will save us. Sarah, thank you for the call. we just have a lot of work to do. I mean, it really comes down to that. We can't slide into despair. It's not an option, as Bernie says. We just have to keep pushing straight ahead and know that what we're doing is the right thing. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a target-rich day, as they say. Wendell Potter's going to be dropping by in our next hour, by the way, just an FYI. A bunch of interesting little bits and pieces here. Non-theists reject President Trump's Supreme Court nominee. This is interesting. Statement by Larry T. Decker, Executive Director of the Secular Coalition of America. You know, unfortunately, people who don't believe in God never really got much traction in the United States. In fact, when Thomas Paine wrote The Age of Reason, which was a book declaring his atheism, it created such a controversy here in the colony. Well, we were the United States at that point. This was like in the 1890s or 1790s. And it created such a controversy that when he came home, when he came back to the United States and was buried, I mean, he died in New York. I believe he died in New York. He was buried in New York City. Only 7 people showed up for his funeral. Thomas Paine. Because, you know, hey, the guy's an atheist. Because America was going through this religious revival, around that time. And basically, we've been kind of stuck ever since. So they're talking about, Burwell and the Little Sisters case, the Little Sisters for the Poor Home for the Aged versus Burwell and all these other decisions, and saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not going with this. Meanwhile, I got another email from Donald Trump. I'm getting emails from Donald Trump every single day. And this one, the one I got today, Thomas, President Trump has officially nominated the Honorable Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. This is apparently not over Trump's signature. It's just from, it came from DonaldJTrump.com. I mean, that's contacted at email.donaldjtrump.com is where it came from. So anyhow, Judge Gorsuch has served our country as a defender of the Constitution, a believer in the rule of law, and a champion of life, and will absolutely be worthy of Justice Scalia's seat. And then he, tell the Senate Democrats to confirm Judge Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. And there's a click. And when you click on it, it takes you to a site where you can give them your information and you can donate more money to the Donald Trump campaign, which, by the way, in the month of December raised $11 million. That's pretty amazing. President Trump, Ken Vogel wrote this for Politico. President Donald Trump's re-election efforts. Re-election, we're talking 2020, 4 years from now. President Donald Trump's re-election efforts are off to a strong start financially, according to Tuesday evening campaign finance reports showing that Trump's 3 committees brought in a combined $11 million last month and finished the year with $16 million in the bank. Meanwhile, all across the United States, people are starting to rise up. They're saying, no, we're not going to take it anymore. People are protesting. They're, in some cases, shutting down traffic, shutting down cities. And so how are Republicans responding to this? Well, they're passing laws, or they're proposing laws in state after state, making it illegal to protest. This is, this is a process that began really with the Nixon administration trying to stop the anti-war protests, and, is continuing to this day. And it's in Minnesota, a bill passed the Republican-controlled committee last week that would allow cities to sue protesters in order to collect money to pay police forces required at a demonstration. So they scan the crowd, they do facial recognition software, and you end up with a bill from a government agency for, say, $5,000 for the cost of police protection because you were protesting. And if you don't pay it, you can go to jail. Lawmakers drafted this, by the way, this is from a piece that Kira Lerner wrote for the Center for American Progress's blog, Think Progress. The headline, Republicans push anti-protest laws. Bills targeting nonviolent protests are multiplying across the country. This was the bill in Minnesota was passed or was drafted. It hasn't passed yet in response to the Black Lives Matter protests after a police officer shot and killed Philando Castile. And this is in Michigan. Republican lawmakers are attacking both unions and protesters by pushing legislation that would increase fines against picketers to $1,000 per person per day of a picket and $10,000 per day for the union that is involved in the picket. That bill passed the State House of Representatives in December. 4 other states are considering anti-protest laws that would target demonstrators who protest on the streets, according to The Intercept. The bills have all been introduced in the last few months as responses to high-profile protests by Black Lives Matter activists and opponents of the Dakota Access Pipeline. The Intercept summarized it the following. In North Dakota, for instance, Republicans introduced a bill last week that would allow motorists to run over and kill any protester obstructing a highway as long as the driver does so accidentally. In Minnesota, a bill introduced by Republicans last week seeks to dramatically stiffen fines for freeway protests, would allow prosecutors to seek a full year of jail time for protesters who block a highway. Republicans in Washington state have proposed a plan to reclassify as a felony civil disobedience protests that are deemed economic terrorism. And in Iowa, Republican lawmakers pledged to introduce legislation to crack down on highway protests. I don't know if any of this is coming out of ALEC or not, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. It's what these guys are doing and how they're doing it is, in some ways rather shocking. And in other ways, I think, we absolutely should expect and should have been expecting all along. This is how it happens, right? The coming decline and fall of the U.S. empire, John Galtung is writing about. Is fascism blossoming? Is the United States blossoming? Are we doing better? Are we sliding backwards? He has these definitions. There are exploiters and exploited economically. Militarily, there are killers and victims. Politically, there are dominators and dominated as repression. Culturally, there are the alienators and the alienated as conditioning. He says that's, empires, he says, have different profiles. The U.S. empire has a complete configuration, articulated in a statement by a Pentagon planner. Quote, de facto role of the United States Armed Forces will be to keep the world safe for our economy and open to our cultural assault. To those ends, we do a fair amount of killing. End of quote. Yikes. Pentagon planners? Anyway. Back with your calls, your thoughts about, what should we do? How do we respond to this right after this? Stick with it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
As you already know, my opinion is all of the above. Get inside the Democratic Party. Get inside organizations that are on the outside that are working for change. And wake up everybody you know. The Philippine war on drugs. Rodrigo Duterte launched a Filipino version of Richard Nixon's war on drugs. Now, you'll recall Richard Nixon's war on drugs, John Ehrlichman told us, the reason for it was that they wanted to bust up the hippies and they wanted to bust up the civil rights movement, essentially. And so they They made heroin and pot super illegal, and whether they planted it on people or people were using it, they just went after that. Well, this war on drugs in the Philippines is now 7 weeks old. This is as of the 23rd, 3 days ago. 7 weeks old. 1,900 people have died. 1,900 people have died. Over 100,000 Mexicans have died just on our border in the Mexican war on drugs. Millions of Americans have had their lives ruined by the war on drugs in this country since Richard Nixon launched it in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Millions of people. And I would say probably between tens and hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result of the war on drugs. This is crazy. Portugal had the third highest drug addiction rate in Europe. Now that includes, Europe these days now includes a number of very, very, the former Soviet states that are very, very poor countries where they have, that are closer, that are farther south and east and closer to the principal source of heroin these days, and opium, which is Afghanistan. And so there's, a couple of countries that had higher drug addiction rates, but among the developed countries of Europe, the so-called Western European nations, Western and Northern European nations, Portugal was number one in terms of drug addiction, and particularly heroin, and new infections of HIV and Hep C, which come along with, sharing needles. So Portugal decriminalized all drugs. They did the exact opposite of what the Philippines did 8 weeks ago when their new president came in. They did the exact opposite. They decriminalized all drugs. And this was 14 years ago, in 2002. And now they have one of, if not the lowest, drug addiction rates in all of Western Europe, arguably probably all of Europe. And the rates of new HIV and Hep C infections have just collapsed. And organized crime in Portugal, at least that part of organized crime that was involved in the drug trade, it broke their back. They're destroyed. They're gone. Toast. We're watching in real time this terrible mistake in the Philippines. 1,900 people killed in the first 7 weeks in the so-called war on drugs. And whereas in Portugal, the Portuguese government, first of all, everybody in Portugal has free health care. So they stopped treating drug addiction as a crime, started treating it as a medical issue. And drug addicts are now they can get their drugs, and they can get clean syringes if they're using injectable drugs. And we're talking all drugs. LSD, cocaine, heroin, you name it. But the big ones, of course, are heroin and pot. But they decriminalized everything and had this really, really good result. Whereas here in the United States, there was just a story, I think it was Indiana, might have been Ohio, somewhere in the Midwest, where something like 18 people had died over the course of a day or two because a new batch of heroin arrived and it had been cut with fentanyl or one of these other pharmaceutical drugs that are actually far more potent than heroin. Yes, heroin is not the most potent or addictive opioid drug. There are a number of prescription drugs that are more powerful than heroin. And, in many parts of the world, heroin is used I believe, as a pharmaceutical. It's dihydromorphine, I think is the chemical name for it. And it's just, heroin is just morphine that has had, a slight change to its molecular structure that makes it a little bit more potent than morphine, or arguably a lot more potent than morphine. But this is, these simple lessons for us, how to figure this stuff out. It's just simple lessons. But there's so much money to be made here in the United States. Oh, and these people who are dying in the United States because they're getting heroin that's laced with, that's been cut with pharmaceuticals. That's because the heroin is illegal. right? I mean, you're not going to end heroin addiction by outlawing it, particularly when you consider that it is, by and large, a medical problem. I mean, addiction is a medical problem. Whether it's addiction to caffeine, to nicotine, to heroin, I mean, you name it, alcohol. These are medical problems that should be treated as medical problems. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, it is February. It's the shortest month of the year, so it must be Black History Month, right? And of course it is. And so Donald Trump held a press conference. I just can't say it. I'm sorry. Donald Trump held a press conference this morning, or remarked. He made some remarks in the Roosevelt Room about the beginning of Black History Month. And what did he say? He said Chicago is totally out of control. And when one of the people who was in the room said that some of the gang leaders in Chicago would like to talk with him about, quote, how to reduce that body count, he said, if they don't stop the violence, we'll solve the problem for them. This is authoritarian on steroids. He said, right now, the state of America's inner cities is terrible. Ellen Ratner writes, he vowed to work with stakeholders to improve wages and reduce violence in inner cities, saying his administration would do so big league. Turned to Ben Carson and said he's gonna be working something out. Right. And singled out CNN as fake news. In fact, the administration has not been providing people to CNN, and they are hoping going to destroy CNN's ratings. Right. Well, just by the way, just a heads up, and I think this is just fascinating. The Hill is reporting that on Wednesday, as I recall, next Tuesday, February 7th at 9 p.m. on CNN, Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz are going to debate the future of Obamacare. This should be really interesting. And now the CNN has been officially barred from, or perhaps unofficially, I don't know, but if functionally, de facto barred from participating with White House press conferences and things. CNN is getting a lot more interesting. I'll get to this Dove ad in just a minute. Let's pick up your phone calls here. The time is flying by. Janice in Manchester Township, New Jersey. Hey, Janice, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I just want to talk about abortion. I'm really scared. I have two granddaughters, and I'm really fearful for them as they, get older, and it really upsets me. And the reason when they're signing, when Trump is signing his, I can't remember what their name is. There's all men standing around, all white men.
Oh, you're talking about the restriction on funds for international agencies that talk about abortions. Yeah, the global gag rule is what it's called. And it was all men. Yeah.
And it just bothers me that men are making decisions about women's health and well-being.
Welcome to Trump's world,
Yeah, I know.
It's like 3 wives. There's a problem with women there, I think. Janice, I share your concern. I think probably everybody listening does. Thank you for calling and raising it. Jill in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, listening on one of our newest stations, the Devil's Advocate, 1510 AM. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, I'm super happy that we have a station now in Milwaukee and Waukesha. It is, WRRD and 1510 AM, and great to hear your voice and your words of wisdom, and it is so needed here in Milwaukee and Waukesha. And then also, I'm super proud of the progressives and the Milwaukee County Democrats for organizing big protest for when Donald Trump was supposed to come to Harley-Davidson, and we called in to Harley-Davidson and we made our voices heard, and they said they were not going to host him.
That's anymore. Right. Harley-Davidson backed down on that thing, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. So kudos to them, and we called them, thanked them, and just remember to support these companies and organizations that do the right thing. And I'm super proud of all the activism involved in that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Jill, thank you for the call. I had meant to mention that earlier, and you beat me to it. Great job. Thank you, Jill. Nancy in Oak Lawn, Illinois. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
I've got a lot to say, but I know I don't have that much time, but I'm hoping I'm not going to get cut off because I think I'm going to speak against, the almighty Democrats. But
okay.
I'm tired of everyone being, especially the progressive talk show hosts, being apologists for the Democrats. I think the reason that and I've learned this from you, from listening to you over the years, I think the reason we're where we're at today is because Democrats always treat us as children. And if President Johnson would have called out Nixon in the first place way back in 1968, we wouldn't be here today and down the line.
I don't disagree with, Johnson should have gone public when he knew that Nixon was committing treason and telling South Vietnam not to end the war in August, September, October of 68. But that was, the vice president, Hubert Humphrey, was on the ticket. And so Nixon was viewing that as an October surprise.
I know, but that's the other problem. You're always saying about how, they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. You know what?
No, I'm not saying that, and I'm not apologizing for the Democrats, Nancy. What I'm saying is, if you don't like the Democratic Party, rather than complaining about it, get inside it.
No, I'm getting inside of it. I'm working on that.
Good.
But I'm just tired of everybody making excuses all the time, and then nothing gets done. And now it seems to me, now I'm probably being pretty negative here, but it seems to me like this country's already been taken over control, and I don't see what the Democrats are going to do about it now. And by the time we get this moron out of there, and it's not just him, it's the whole TP administration, and TP is exactly the letters we should be using for that whole group, because they are destroying America, and I'm not sure if it's already too far down the road where we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, we are not too far down the road. There is still a lot of opportunity. Things, political history, if nothing else, certainly goes in cycles. We need to, rather than throwing our hands up, rather than complaining about our allies who might be less than perfect, we need to be doing everything we can to pull together, Nancy. We really do. Nancy, thank you for the call. Linda in Matlock, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hello. I'd like to call about the Supreme Court appointment of this individual. It sounds like he's a very social conservative person. And one of the things that hasn't been really brought up is, what is his views on marriage equality, and will that Supreme Court decision be in peril, and what will that do to the LGBTQ population of America as far as protecting their rights that they've gained?
That's a very good question, and I don't think anybody knows the answer, although if his votes are consistent, if his position on the Supreme Court is consistent with the positions that he's taken up to this point, which seem to be, fairly tightly in with either fundamentalist Protestantism or Catholicism, in all probability, he is opposed to LGBTQ equality. But we don't know, and that's the sort of thing, ideally that you hold hearings for. Except that, these guys have developed, basically lying at hearings into an art form. I'm sure he's being very well prepped right now. And, but, this is the hand that we've been dealt, Linda. We have to organize. We have to dig in. We have to get active. Linda, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Shabbos in Staten Island, New York. Am I saying that right? Shabbos?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to, I recently immigrated from Pakistan to the U.S. 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday I read the Washington Post article which says that immigrants already living in the United States who may depend on taxpayer help, according to a draft executive order obtained by Washington Post, they could be deported.
Yes, this is not one that Donald Trump has signed, but it will explode when it happens, and it will feed the Republican base. This is a Fox News. This is made for Fox News. You know, we're going to kick people out of the country who are on food stamps because they only came into the country to get on food stamps, basically, is the argument that Republicans are making. Shabbos?
Seems like they want to put all the blame on immigrants for their failures.
Of course.
And spread hatred.
Yes, this is a classic fascist playbook. It's the absolute classic fascist playbook, which is scapegoat and demonize and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's what we're seeing right now. Chavez, thank you for the call. I share your concern. We'll see if Trump goes that far. I'm betting he will, because I think, you know, this guy has no shame, and it would be there's a political upside to demonizing immigrants for him with his base, which is tragic. I mean, there was a political upside to Hitler for it too in '33.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with Talk Media News and your calls right after this. And welcome back. William in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, watching us on YouTube. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering, what do you think the chances are of a federal right-to-work law being passed under the Trump administration?
Very high.
And how do you think that would affect labor in this country?
It'll destroy it.
Destroy it.
I mean, it's just they did this in 1947 with Taft-Hartley, which took a major bite out of the backside of the employee or the National Labor Relations Act, and of 1930, whatever it was, 35, I think it was, the law that authorized unions to exist, and Taft-Hartley empowered individual states to essentially withdraw from that, to keep the federal mandate that says that the unions must pay for representation for all employees of a company. But if they choose not to pay union dues, that's fine. And which is totally bizarre. It's like saying, okay, every lawyer in the country has to take anybody who walks in the door and do the legal work for them, and the people walking in the door can choose to either pay or not pay, because that's what the unions have to do. They have to take on the legal responsibility of all the employees, even those who choose not to pay union dues. And so right to work destroys unions. It has in every state, in all 28 states that it's passed in. And the average worker, the average employee in a right to work for less state makes around $6,000 a year less than the average employee in a union state. And, you know, that's where we're at. And
6,000?
Yeah, $6,000.
Wow.
Yeah. Every American should know this, right? That the average wage in a right to work for less state is $6,000 a year below that of union states. And the Republicans are just aggressively cranking out these right to work for less laws in state after state after state to destroy the unions, so that because the unions are one of the largest funders of the Democratic Party, and they're also one of the largest providers of shoe leather to the Democratic Party for elections and things, and so that's why they're going after them. And it's wrong, but I mean, we are looking at an era right now, William, that I think we're seeing, the 1920s and 1930s replayed right in front of our eyes. And Gorsuch and others, they're going to take us back to the 20s. In 1920, in the election of 1920, Warren Harding won, the Republican. The top tax rate was 91% at that time, and there was a fair amount of federal regulation. And he won on a campaign of saying, cut those taxes on rich people. And one of his slogans was, more business in government, but less government in business. In other words, privatize and deregulate. And that brought great prosperity for 7-8 years in the 20s. It actually was a bubble through the Harding and Coolidge and Hoover administrations, and that bubble burst in the Hoover administration. And I'm fully expecting to see the exact same thing happen right now. So, do you know anything about national right to work, William, beyond what I've just said?
That's it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot for the call. 5 seconds. Okay. I'm not going to put another caller on if I have 5 seconds to go. But this is the thing. I mean, the Republicans have been fighting unionism since the 30s. The Republican position on unions is exactly the same as the Republican position on Social Security. These are socialist programs. We cannot allow them. Right? Everything should be run by billionaires and big corporations. They should be the ones with the power. How dare these little people think they can form a union? We'll be right back. And welcome back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour, and let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner. Ellen, hey, welcome.
Well, one of the wonderful things is that Governor Siegelman is getting out of prison on the 8th of February.
Oh, really? Next week?
Yes.
That's great.
So I hope to go see him. I'm going to be on my way to South Sudan, but I will see him when I get back. Okay. Well, this is breaking news, and this is from the Boston Globe. They said that even though there is a federal court order in Boston, New York, and elsewhere from this base allowing the people from the 7 countries coming to the United States, they're not being allowed to board planes overseas because the State Department had already revoked their visas.
Whoa.
That's just breaking news.
So we're not. So what was it? A blanket visa revocation?
I don't know. I mean, the story's just literally coming over the wires, and I'm not sure they know at this point.
Wow, the walls are really coming down. Or going up, I guess.
Also, the president today met with, because it's the start of Black History Month, he met and he talked about several things. He talked about the state of the inner cities. He said right now it's terrible. He vowed to work with the stakeholders to improve the cities, and he turned to Ben Carson, and he said that was what Ben Carson would be working on. And then he also said that he went after the fake news and CNN. He said it was a sad situation, and he glanced to the pool members while he was saying that. Also, it's very interesting.
Was that a threat, Ellen?
Well, I don't know.
This could be you, too, that, never again.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He's certainly barred any of his administration people from getting on CNN. The other thing is that talk show host Armstrong Williams, who, as you know, is very connected to Ben Carson. He was his sort of chief consigliere. He was at the meeting as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Armstrong Williams, the guy who got busted for taking money from the Bush administration and writing basically fake news releases or fake news stories?
Oh, yeah, well, yes. Armstrong has a long history with us.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so now, this is very interesting. As you know, they are looking at Mr. Price and Mr. Mnuchin for their committee votes. What they did is they basically changed the committee rules today so that they don't need one Democrat in the committee hearings, and they approved those nominations.
Right. A little backstory. Both of these nominees theoretically have to get out of committee before there can be a floor vote for the Senate. To get out of committee, you have to have a vote. And in order to have a vote, you have to have a quorum. And the quorum was all the Republicans plus one Democrat. And the Democrats were saying, wait a minute, Steve Mnuchin and Tom Price both lied to us. And until they clean up those lies, Mnuchin about robo-signing foreclosure notices, he's referred to as the foreclosure king, and Price about his insider trading on healthcare stocks, until they clean up those lies, we're not going to show up to the committee hearings for the vote. And so they changed, like you said, they changed the rules and said, okay, forget it. The vote goes to the floor, and we'll never find out what they, they're never going to be held to account for their lies.
Never. Also, now the EPA administrator, they need 2 Democratic votes. They haven't yet changed those rules, but I'm sure they will in that particular committee.
I agree, and I think look for the nuclear option coming on the Supreme Court.
Well, the president talked about the nuclear option. He said if he's going to tell Mitch McConnell to take the nuclear option, he said that Obama had been held up for 8 years by all this partisanship. He said, and to be fairness to Obama, it wasn't just Obama, and that he was going to tell Mitch McConnell to take the nuclear option.
Right.
It's pretty unbelievable. Okay, I'll keep on going here. The Harley Davidson, it looked like the president was supposed to visit there. The White House said there was no scheduled visit. Harley Davidson, this is in Michigan, said that they were looking forward to a presidential visit. What we do know is that there were some advanced people there already, but there were protests planned, and so they canceled it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Harley Davidson is largely made in America, so that would be... And plus, it's the whole Harley, we're tough guys culture that authoritarians like Trump would be very comfortable with.
Right. Okay.
Although the company is not, the company seems a little more reasonable. But anyhow, back to you, Ellen. So
now also there's a question about jobs with China. Apparently the trade imbalance with China has gone to $367 billion. And they're talking about currency manipulation.
Is that for last year, or is that what's projected for this year?
That is what they are now saying it is.
So far in this fiscal year?
No, it would be 2016.
2016.
Yes.
All right.
So they're now saying, obviously that is going to be top of Trump's whatever he does, right?
Right.
Okay. On some other issues, there is the question about that immigration ban, and now you have the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, because he's a new Secretary General. He said the best way to protect the United States is not to have an immigration ban, but to take in immigrants. And obviously that's going to fall on deaf ears as well.
Yeah, whatever happened to the shining city on a hill?
Well, it doesn't exist. Also,
not in Trump's world.
Today, the White House put out who they say President Trump faces obstructionism not faced by previous presidents. They're talking about when the Secretary of State was confirmed, when the Secretary of Treasury was confirmed under Bush, under Barack Obama. They're saying that these are all pending and that they were confirmed by the 20th or 22nd, except for the Secretary of Commerce under President Obama, which took a while longer.
Well, I thought every single one of Obama's cabinet picks got the 30-hour treatment.
Well, they did, but they were somehow, I think initially the Democrats did control the Senate in the beginning, so of course they got through very, very quickly. Yeah. So a couple other interesting things. Ban Ki-moon, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations, is not going to be running as a conservative or as anything for president of South Korea.
Right, and South Korea is in a terrible mess right now with the president charged with corruption.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's going on. Also, it's interesting. Representative Sandy Levin, he's a Democrat from Michigan. He's 85 years old. He said that he has not seen anything like this since the Vietnam War in terms of protests. He said it's spontaneous, it's unorganized. The challenge is going to be to organize it. He says, I've been around for a long time, and I haven't seen anything like this since the Vietnam War.
Yeah, people forget, or people aren't old enough to remember, and it frankly isn't that much of a part of our history, but in 1971, which was well after the 60s, but this was in response to Nixon. In 1971, SDS came to D.C. and shut this city down.
Well, that's right. And I was in the protest in November of 1969, which was one of the largest protests ever held on the Mall.
Wow.
So I remember that.
Yeah.
And, of course, even before 69, when LBJ was president, we used to say, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember it well. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Hey, Ellen, reminiscence here. It's great talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll be back right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Thom Hartmann University Book Club reading today from Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It. This is from one of the last chapters, chapter 13. It's titled Setting the Rules of the Game, and the subchapter Gaming the System. If government can create conditions that cause a middle class to emerge by implementing fair rules for business, progressive taxation, free public education, the opposite is also true. Government can create a corporatocracy by deregulating business, by cutting taxes on extreme wealth, and by privatizing as much of the commons as possible. Conservatives call this starving the beast. Here's how you starve the beast. You put through tax cuts for the rich, which cuts back the revenues of the federal government to the point that if you got rid of all the social programs, you'd have a balanced budget. No more Social Security, no more spending for education, no more spending for Medicare and Medicaid. Let the government simply keep the armies, prisons, and police. Let's shrink government. That's their philosophy. When you cut all those social programs, you lose the middle class and in its place, create a very small, wealthy elite and a large underclass of starvation wage workers. You lose democracy and instead create corporatocracy. You change the rules of the game. We, the people, lose, and the feudal lords win. Cons have been winning this particular game of starve the beast since Reagan first started seriously playing it in 1981. They've done it in large part by lying to the American people. And they've had to do that because if they told the truth, the majority of Americans would throw them out of office. This is, after all, still a democracy. If the majority of us agree to get rid of Social Security so that only the wealthy can have retirement benefits and the old are left to fend for themselves, so be it. If a guy breaks his neck and can't work and the majority of us decide not to help people who are disabled, and as a result he has to beg on the street, well, we can democratically decide to screw him and ourselves. But the conservatives are not having this debate in an open and honest fashion. They're not asking we, the people, if we want to get rid of, for example, the Head Start program. They could ask, do we want to invest in our youth or not? We know that if we invest in educating the very young, fewer of them will become criminals. It will save us money over the long term. But the majority will say, of us say, no, we would rather pay $50,000 to imprison them later than pay $300 to put them in a Head Start now. If we said that, then that's fine. It's a democracy. But that's not the way the cons are doing it. Instead of explaining why it would be better for Americans to give all their money to the corporate elite, they're giving huge tax cuts to the rich while pretending that the tax cuts benefit all Americans. Instead of arguing that Americans should not expect the right to health care or security in their own old age, they are promoting a government crisis by handing to the rich the money we're borrowing from China, Japan, and Korea in the name of our grandkids. They're borrowing so much money from these countries that if they so much as blink, our currency could crash. And that's just what the most ideological of the conservative elite want. They want an economic crisis because they figure that's the only way they can force a cut in spending on social programs. In 2004, they thought that they had starved the beast enough, and they sent Bush out on the campaign trail to advocate getting rid of Social Security, privatizing it, putting it in the hands of Wall Street. But it didn't work. Turns out we, the people, apparently like Social Security. So the cons went back to starving the beast. Bush instead passed a new series of tax cuts with more to follow. The cons are trying to play the game so that the rich benefit while the rest of us lose out. They get tax cuts, we get program cuts. That's not a free market. That's a market that's being created for the benefit of the rich at the expense of the middle class. The question Americans have faced since the first arguments between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton in the 1780s was whether the game of business should be played with the primary goal of enriching the few, or, while allowing the few to enrich themselves, enhancing the quality of the life of the many. The cons suggest that if the rich win first, benefits will trickle down to the rest of us. Protecting workers, they say, will produce abnormalities and dislocations from a so-called free market. For example, they suggest that when minimum wages are fixed by government and labor can lawfully bargain to increase wages by increasing scarcity of labor through union actions, the result is an increase in prices, ultimately hurting the working person. But the economists they often cite in this thinking, David Ricardo, disagreed that raising wages first increased prices. He noted, quote, "On the contrary, a rise of wages from the circumstance of the laborer being more liberally rewarded, or from a difficulty of procuring the necessities on which wages are expended, does not, except in some instances, produce the effect of raising price, but has a great effect in lowering profits," end of quote. In other words, all that talk about keeping wages down to keep prices down is a smokescreen. Business owners want to keep wages down to keep profits up. And when wages go down, profits do indeed go up. American wages have been falling steadily since Reagan first reintroduced conservative economics in 1980. And American corporations are generally more profitable than they've been in decades. In part, this is not only because wages are going down within the United States, but also because U.S.-level wages are being replaced by India and China-level wages through offshoring and outsourcing. But offshoring isn't a problem for American workers, the cons shout. It's the increase in productivity. American businesses need fewer workers because of automation. This is a tragic lie, and it's been bought hook, line, and sinker by most American politicians and even some economists. The book is Screwed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and very pleased to have in the studio with me Wendell Potter, former health insurance industry executive, the author of a couple of books, Deadly Spin and Nation on the Take. The new paperback edition of Nation on the Take is coming out February 7th, next week. That's great. And you've got a new project, Assume Nothing, Trust Tarbell. Crony Capitalism Controls America. Sign up and learn why that matters to you. This is tarbell.org. You can tweet, by the way, and also you can find out all about Wendell Potter at wendellpotter.com, and you can tweet him at Wendell Potter, 2 L's, 2 T's, Wendell Potter. Well, it's just at Wendell Potter, isn't it, your Twitter handle? Okay, right. So first of all, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great having you with us, Wendell.
Thank you.
Tell us, Tarbell. What is Tarbell? Why that name? What are you doing here?
Well, I started this because I felt there was a big gap in journalism in this country. My last book, as you noted, is Nation on the Take. It's a book about all the money that is spent to control and influence elections and public policy and public opinion. I was a part of that, actually, in industry when I worked for the insurance industry. So I know it from that perspective as well, too. It's some work I used to do. And I want to help people understand the connection between all the money that's spent to influence public policy and our everyday lives. I want them to understand why Verizon, for example, spends so much money to influence public policy on Capitol Hill or in their state legislatures, and what that means to them in their daily lives.
Why do they?
Why do they spend all that much money? Yeah. It is to enhance shareholder value. It's most of these are publicly traded companies. They work individually.
Well, that sounds rather benign, you know. Oh, we just want to enhance shareholder value.
Sounds very benign. Yeah, that's.
But what's the reality behind it that's less than benign?
The reality, it is a very benign statement. It's sounding that way, but that means that the people who are really benefiting are the shareholders, the people who own big chunks of stock of these publicly traded companies. And that is the allegiance of these CEOs, like the people I used to work with and work for. It is not their customers, and it is to make as much profit, to generate as much revenue that can be converted to profits.
So a health insurance company like the one that you used to be a senior executive with, their goal is not to make sure that everybody who has a policy with them gets the best coverage or gets their vaccines or their surgery or whatever. Their actual first mission is to make as much money as possible.
Exactly. And it is why you're seeing a lot of the companies exit the Obamacare exchanges, for example, because they don't have a commitment to insure people. In fact, the term insurance company is not really appropriate anymore because they shun as much risk as possible. Their ideal customer is a big self-insured employer, and that employer is actually providing the insurance, taking on the risk, and they're just providing the services. So they don't want to help Obamacare succeed. They don't have any incentive other than to make sure that there's no book of business within the company that is not meeting shareholders' expectations.
Right. So thing number one here, or the first thing here, is that, and not to rip off Chris Hayes, is that you'd like people to check out tarbell.org, TARBELL.org, and participate in helping launch this new media platform that's going to basically out corporate greed, for lack of a better phrase.
That's a good way to put it, and to help people understand why they should care and why they should get engaged. We have a dual objective of helping to get people organized, to understand how they can get involved and the importance of that.
So why the name Tarbell?
Tarbell is named after Ida Minerva Tarbell, one of the most important journalists in American history. Few people know about her now. She
was late 19th century.
Exactly, in the early 20th century, and her journalism led to some of the most important antitrust laws in the country and campaign finance laws during the Teddy Roosevelt administration. She and her reporting actually led to the breakup of the huge Standard Oil conglomerate that John D. Rockefeller had formed, and just incredibly important investigative reporting. And she was one of the country's first. She was pioneering journalism in many different ways. First as an investigative reporter, but as a woman reporter.
Yeah, remarkable. So you want to go down that road, and that's
I'm going to do her right.
You're taking on a big project here. Yeah. So meanwhile, Deadly Spin and Nation on the Take, your other books, and of course you worked in the health insurance industry for years and years. What's your take on what the Republicans, given that basically they control the government? I mean, they've got the House, they've got the Senate, they've got the Supreme Court, or they will, soon in a big way, and complete with the guy who helped author one of the Hobby Lobby decisions in the 10th Circuit.
Right.
What are they going to do about health care? I mean, they were all Sturm und Drang about, repealing Obamacare because, Fox News and right-wing hate radio had so convinced Americans that Obamacare was some sort of destructive socialist plot, evil, terrible thing. I doubt most people could tell you exactly why it's an evil, terrible thing, but they just know it because they heard it on Rush Limbaugh or they saw it on Fox News. So the Republicans now are in this bind, right? They because Obamacare was the Republican alternative, wasn't it? I mean, isn't this what Richard Nixon proposed in '72? Yeah. What the Heritage Foundation cleaned up and rolled out in '86?
Exactly. What again in '92?
Yeah, and then what Mitt Romney put into place in 2000 in Massachusetts, thinking that in 2004 he'd run for president on the success of Romneycare.
That's right.
So this was the Republican alternative all along. Yeah. President Obama put it into place. Why didn't the Republicans say, "Hey, finally, thanks for coming around to our side"?
Because they saw it as a political tool, and they were right. They used it, and it helped them win elections. They convinced a lot of people that it was the worst thing ever. And it was complex. The Democrats, I fault them because the Democrats did an incredibly lousy job of explaining the legislation. It's complex. It's not an easy thing to do. But the Obama administration and congressional Democrats didn't really own it after they passed it. And as a consequence, the Republicans were able to define it. Now, to your point, they're in a dilemma. There is the expectation that they have something to replace it with, but they don't have nothing.
Right. And this there was they got nothing. There was a secret recording of a group of Republicans meeting House
Philadelphia, exactly.
Yeah. And they were like, "What are we going to do?"
Exactly. Right? It didn't surprise me a bit. it's interesting that the recording exists because it is the evidence of what I've been writing about. They don't have anything that is planned. 7 years after the law was passed, they've been demeaning this and saying that it needed to be replaced. You would think in that period of time they would have come up with a plan, but they haven't. There's no consensus, and there's no expectation that what they come up with will leave us in better shape. And in fact, it's more than likely that we'll go back to the dark days before the Affordable Care Act.
Trump has said he wants everybody. Did he say be covered or have access?
He used the term. He said beautifully covered. That came out of his mouth in a meeting with.
Coverage is different than access.
Exactly.
Right? Access means that you can go to the nearest ER.
That's the term that I think they're trying to shift to now. That's their masters, and I don't mean to beat up on the Republicans. This is just
free.
It's what happens in politics. But they in particular are really good at messaging and the use of language, and so they're shifting the terminology to say access. And you're right; it could be we have access to the emergency room, or you have access to a doctor if you've got the money to go see that doctor.
Right. So access and coverage are two completely different things.
Absolutely, two very different things.
Yeah. So how do you see this resolving? I mean, is it conceivable that Trump and his desire to be loved by everybody could actually embrace a single payer system and blow up the Republican Party, or is it inconceivable? Is he going to have to do the Paul Ryan, okay, we're gonna cut this thing to shreds routine, or face impeachment by his own party?
Yeah. It remains to be seen. He is, in fact, as you know, in the past has said positive things about the Canadian and Scottish system.
Yeah, he supported single-payer health care. I mean, it's been a decade since he's made any public pronouncements on it.
And then in 2015, he was saying that the Canadian system works well for the Canadians. And I doubt, though, that he will embrace single-payer. I don't think he will have that kind of support on Capitol Hill. We know he won't. Yeah. But he's in a dilemma because he has promised something that I don't think even the Republican PR machine can. I don't think they can come up with the terms to make people think that they've done something better.
This is where Bernie and the Republicans are doing everything they can to say, "Hey, you said." Right. Everybody gets covered, and you said you're not going to cut Social. You're not going to let the Republicans cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Yeah. Although Paul Ryan is building that budget as we speak. Right. Anyhow, Wendell Potter, one of the great ones. Wendell Potter, you can tweet at Wendell Potter, wendellpotter.com, and Tarbell, TARBELL.org. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Tom. Take care.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Anna Maria in Decatur, Illinois, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Anna Maria, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that Medicaid has always been referred, in all media basically, as only for the poor. But we're made poor by Social Security, first of all. And secondly, Medicaid is a horrible system. It's just a failure in every possible way, and I'm dying. I mean, like, as I speak to you, I'm actually dying of pancreatic failure.
And therefore, why, Anna Maria, why did you call?
I just wanted everyone to know that there is a healthcare holocaust that had gone on prior to this, when all we had was, as you said, access, as Wendell Potter said. Right. Access just means that when you're on the eve of death, you can go to a hospital and basically die there.
Right. And your family gets a giant bill. Anna Marie, thank you for the call. It's I wish you the very best. I'm sorry to hear about your predicament. Christine in Ashland, Oregon. Hey, Christine, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm concerned about our ability to protest. I'm sorry for this lady who just spoke too. I swore that if that anything like that happens to me, I'm going to go to Washington and die on the lawn. But my concern is our ability to protest, and with these guys cutting apart our laws like this and taking away our freedoms, I'm just wondering what the steps will be or would be for them to start declaring martial law at our protests.
Well, you've got 4 states right now that are contemplating laws that functionally criminalize protest. They do it through the means of money. They say that you're costing our state money, or in one case they're saying that protest that interferes with commerce is economic terrorism. And once you've been branded a terrorist in the United States, your prospects of having a decent life or even surviving start diminishing real rapidly. I agree. That's why I brought the issue up earlier today. I think it's a big issue and it's a big concern. We need to be speaking out. And we need to be stopping these Republicans wherever and however we can.
How can we do that? This is what I don't know. If they're going to start firing into the crowds with martial law because we're protesting, I don't really see that too terribly far away.
Yeah, this was, on one of the right-wing hate websites, I mean, literally one of the Nazi websites, there was a conversation about how, we need another Kent State incident to put the fear of God in protesters. And that's not good. I mean, this is, Trump and the right-wingers and right-wing hate radio and Fox so-called news have activated this white supremacist base in the United States and made them feel empowered in a way that is, I think, very, very dangerous. And the best thing that we can do, I believe, Christine, is speak about it, is hold it up. The best disinfectant is sunlight. Hold it up to the light of day and tell people, what's going on, and then, give them an opportunity to get active. Christine, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Ann in Aurora, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how you doing, Tom?
I'm well. How are you, Ann?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Then I'll get off the phone and let you answer it. When the Affordable Care Act is repealed and not replaced, and people's lives are at risk, is Donald Trump going to stand trial for murder, or is he exempt from it?
He's exempt from it.
He is exempt?
Yeah. According to Harvard University, we had, before Obamacare, about 45,000 people a year in the United States dying because they lacked access to health insurance, to health care via not having health insurance. And now with the Affordable Care Act, having expanded that and reduced our uninsured rate to the lowest in the history of the United States, the number is down into the teens of thousands. 15, 20,000 people a year are dying as a result of lack of health care. And most of those are in red states where the governors or the legislatures have chosen not to expand Medicaid, so that people who make under $20,000 a year roughly, don't qualify. Holding Trump personally responsible for this, I don't think will be possible, legally. We absolutely need to be holding him and the entire Republican Party responsible in the court of public opinion. And that's the work that you and I have to do, Ann. And I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Tom in Chicago. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind? Tom?
Hey, Tom. Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening. You're on the air.
I saw today that they were proposing, the representative from South Carolina and Iowa were proposing a national right to work law.
Yep.
And I just wanted to get everyone informed about it, because I'm a proud union member in the state of Illinois, and my parents, I grew up in a union household.
Mm-hmm.
And I've already called all the congressmen I can, and I've did what I can. So I'm just trying to get it out there because I know a lot of people.
No, it's an important one, and for people who don't know, and there's probably quite a few people who still don't realize what the whole right to work thing is basically there is a federal law that says that if you are in a unionized workplace and you have a dispute with your employer, or for that matter, any dispute that has to do with your workplace, or if you're injured, or if you have a grievance or whatever, the union has to provide you with a lawyer. They have to bargain on your behalf. They have to provide you with representation. Even if that lawyer, even if the legal fees cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, the union by law has to provide that service to you because you work in that business that has the union. So historically, the way that unions paid for this service was by charging union dues. So the slick little trick that the Republicans came up with is they said, let's leave in place that federal requirement from the National Labor Relations Act that the unions have to provide people with a lawyer and employees with a lawyer if they want, and that the unions have to pay for it. Let's leave that requirement intact and do away with the requirement that people have to pay union dues. So you get half the union no longer paying their dues, but the union is obligated to defend them. There is no place else in the United States, there is no other area, no other realm where people are told by the government, an industry, in this case, the lawyers working for the unions, where a group of, a nonprofit or a nonprofit organization or business is told by the government, you must represent these people, even if you're not paid. If we were to say, let's pass a right to defense law. So you or I can walk into any lawyer's office anywhere in the United States and say, you must defend me, or you must, prosecute on my behalf because I'm going to take on so-and-so. And by the way, I'm not going to pay you. That's how absurd it is. But that's exactly what Right to Work for Less does. And the 28 states that have passed Right to Work for Less laws since 1947, when this was authorized by Congress, basically during the Harry Truman administration. The 28 states that have done that, the people living and working in those states, the Right to Work for Less states, make on average $6,000 a year less than do people in union states. And that, you're absolutely right, Tom. This is something we need to wake up everybody about. Tom, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. William in Brown Summit, North Carolina. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today? Just wanted to make a brief comment about our lack of not being able to peacefully protest or peaceful dissent. This is the first time I've heard something. I'm 67 years old, and this is the first I've heard of this since, I guess, back in the 60s, when the civil rights movement was going on. And people was being attacked. And I have I can understand the lady that called about 4 or 5 calls ago to say she was concerned about this and she didn't know what we were going to do. And I guess I'm kind of in that same boat. However, what else can we do except for just to accept this? And I know you're saying we need to get active, get inside the Democratic Party, and that's all well and good. But at the same time, numbers speaks volume, and when you can make your presence known and your voice is heard, I think that's what brings on a lot of change. And
I agree. I'm very concerned about this, William. John Kennedy said that if you make peaceful protest impossible, you make violent protest inevitable, or words to that effect.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
William, thank you for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. One of the things that I wanted to mention earlier in the week, a couple of days ago, it was announced that the Nobel Prize for Economics was given to Oliver Hart and Bent Holstrom on contract theory. And there's, two kind of interesting things about this. The first is that there is really not a Nobel Prize in economics. Alfred Nobel never envisioned that. The foundation that he created to award the Nobel Peace Prize does not give out a prize in economics. It was created by a bank in Sweden back in the day so that they could give a Nobel Prize, in quotes. It's really the Nobel, it is the prize in economics in memory of Alfred Nobel, right? I mean, he's dead, so you can't unauthorize it. Long dead. He's the guy who invented dynamite, TNT. And so, you know, it was originally created to be able to give a nice sounding prize and some credibility to what is today known as libertarian economics and supply side economics and right-wing economics and Republican economics and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, typically it's been used, you know, pretty much politicized. But here's what's interesting. This year's economics prize in memory of Alfred Nobel, and it's interesting, the only news agency that I've heard actually accurately report that, by the way, the actual name of the prize was NPR, for what it's worth, and me. But what they gave the prize for was a couple of guys who pointed out that privatizing things is stupid. That privatizing things, when they are appropriately part of the commons, they are appropriate functions of government, actually works to the detriment of both the government and the people. Doing what Bill Haslam wants to do in Tennessee. Doing what a Republican governor in Michigan did back a decade and a half ago or so. Doing, you know, what Republicans all across the country have been, you know, plugging and pushing and hyping. Privatization. Doing what Gary Johnson talks about. This is, actually, it's kind of he throws it out as you know, privatization is always better. But clip number 2, Danielle, here's Gary Johnson talking about this. Listen.
Should President Obama's health care plan be repealed? Yes.
Gun control sounds terrific, but at the end of the day, I think it makes this country less safe.
Minimum wage is much to do about nothing.
I look forward to that one.
Just like every aspect of life, private can do it better than public.
I do advocate eliminating income tax, corporate tax, eliminating the IRS.
I don't know exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah. So they've intersliced Bernie kind of commenting on Gary Johnson. This is from the Democratic Coalition Against Trump, this video. But this is The Guardian Larry Elliott in The Guardian wrote a piece about this so-called Nobel Prize in economics. And he writes, this matters because there are two often conflicting forces at work when a government decides whether it should run its own services or whether it should privatize them. Improvements to quality and cost reduction. Hart's work, and he's talking about Oliver Hart, one of the 2 economists who won the prize. Hart's work shows that if the government's main priority is to improve quality, it should retain control, since private providers usually have too strong an incentive to cut costs. This can result in an unacceptable drop in quality. One example cited by Hart was the U.S. prison system, where a paper written almost 2 decades ago expressed concern about these in private hands. The U.S. government now accepts that conditions in privately run prisons are significantly worse than those in publicly owned and has decided to end their use. So our own federal government is figuring out, you know, 40 years after Reagan first proposed essentially privatizing everything, and Gary Johnson is continuing that mantra, as are Paul Ryan and the institutional Republicans. And there's no doubt there's many areas where Donald Trump would say privatize it too, although he has broken with the Republican Party, which I find is fascinating, to say I'm not going to privatize Social Security or Medicare. Trump got this is an important thing to remember. Trump got the Republican nomination by taking Democratic Party positions, opposing free trade deals. Every single free trade deal that's passed Congress has been opposed by a majority of Democrats in the House, opposed by a majority of Democrats in the Senate, and supported by a majority of Republicans in the House and a majority of Republicans in the Senate. You wonder why Paul Ryan is upset with Donald Trump? Donald Trump wants to maintain Social Security, and he wants to kill the trade deals. These are Democratic positions. In fact, these are positions that Hillary Clinton is taking. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on the same side of the issue. And it's making the Republicans crazy. And now you've got a couple of guys winning the Nobel Prize pointing out that Paul Ryan and the institutional Republicans are completely wrong on this. That doesn't make Trump right. Trump just knows what the people want. He's pushing that button. I mean, it doesn't mean that he's truthful about what he's going to do. After all, he is a Republican. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What a day. Basically, the Republicans are saying, rules? We don't need no stinking rules. Right? You're supposed to have one Democrat to get Tom Price out of committee? Nah, we'll just change the rules. We'll suspend the rules. We don't need those stinking rules. We're the Republicans. We're in charge. The consolation, as it were, is that pride goeth before the fall. And we've got some serious pride going on here. Some serious, hey, yeah, we don't care about the American people. We're just going to do this. Russ in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Russ, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's on your mind? Russ?
Hello.
Hey, you're on the air.
Yeah, Tom, this is Russ in Portland. Yeah. Were you aware of the Republican plan to privatize all of the public land in the country, the national forests, the wilderness areas, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, they've been working on this since the 70s. It was originally called the Wise Use Movement.
Yeah,
and
exactly,
and it's gone through 2 or 3 morphs and a couple of different name changes, and now there are proposals. There's a federal proposal, and then there's also a state proposal in, I think it's Utah or maybe it's Idaho, to turn over millions of acres to private for-profit extraction companies of federal land. Not all.
It's about 300 million acres, and if people want to be informed on what's going on, they need to go to a website that David K. Johnston, who you may be familiar with,
I know David,
has put up, called dcreport.org. That's DC, as in Washington, D.C., report.org. And one of his, he's got 2 stories up right now on that website, and one of them has to do with this effort by the Republicans in Congress to basically what they're going to do is give away all these public lands, and people need to go to dcreport.org if they care about this issue.
Okay.
Particularly, also, it would be helpful if they did a Google search on Amendment 838. Now, Amendment 838 was voted on and passed. It was a budget amendment which did not have the force of law. It was a declaration of intent only. But it passed on March 25th, 2015, and it passed by 51-49 with a couple of Republicans voting against it. All of the Democrats voted against it, and all of the Republicans voted for it. People who live in Nevada and Arizona who care about this issue need to get in touch with Dean Heller, the senator from Nevada, and Jeff Flake, the senator from Arizona. Both these guys are up for re-election in 2018, and let them know that if they go along with this, they're not going to have, your vote.
Right. Especially if you live in one of those 2 states. Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Russ.
Both of those guys are vulnerable. They did not win by big majorities the last time out.
Right, and these are both states that are sort of trending purple these days. Russ, thanks for bringing up a really important issue. I appreciate the call. Samir in Alma, Arkansas. Do I have that right, Samir?
Hello. No, I'm from Alma, Arkansas.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm just calling here to say I love your show, and I'm a fan. And I really appreciate all that you do to expose and give us the facts. I came from Syria, actually, to the United States because everybody want to come for the best country, for the education, and blah, blah, blah. And I served 20 years in the Navy. And all this time, I really didn't understand what's going on. And now with this last couple of years, after I retired from the military, I started watching more news and get more active, and I started learning and understanding really how the United States system is working. And I realized that we are in the same situation as in the Middle East. We are under certain rules and dictatorships of Democratic and Republican parties and corrupted system. I mean, so I'm looking at it like it's the same as what's in the Middle East, and also the Secret Service, which was a problem in the Middle East until now. People, disappearing and getting killed. And now in the U.S., I'm seeing this trend going up and up. I'm like, oh, my God, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So I'm like really disappointed, and I'm like frustrated. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Why is this happening in a free country like this?
Mm-hmm. The reality of America and the ideal of America have always had some separation between them from the founding of this country until today. But I think that we're actually going backwards. Every time Republicans take power, we literally are going backwards. They want to take it. They say they want to take our country back. They literally mean back, like as in back to 1950, back to when women had functionally no rights, when minorities had no rights, when there was basically no tolerance for anything other than white male Christian power, and it's not a good thing, and it's not an American ideal. The Republican Party is entirely sold out to petro-billionaires and transnational corporations. And
also, I would like to add, I'm right here in Arkansas, and the people over here, they're very good, they're very nice, but the problem is they're not a lot of them, like they're not open, or they don't understand what's happening outside the world.
Well, it's not just that, Samir. They're actually malinformed because Fox News is so pervasive in rural America. Fox News is available everywhere for free. Fox and CNN basically are the basic cable. MSNBC is an extra $5. Although it looks like Andy Lack is trying to turn that into the new Fox News, so who knows where it'll be in a year. But our media landscape in this country is so tortured that you have to forgive these people for being not just uninformed but malinformed, badly informed. They believe things that are not simply not true, and the Republican Party is very, very competent at just telling lies to get political power. And classic example is what's going on right now in dozens of when you've got a couple of cabinet secretaries, in this case Steve Mnuchin and Tom Price, who basically lied before Congress under oath. Mnuchin saying, "Oh, we didn't do robo-signing when we threw tens of thousands of people out of their houses." Actually, they did. I mean, there's an enormous amount of evidence. And then Tom Price, I'm not going to talk about those health insurance stocks that I was able, that I got the tip on. I could buy cheap in a special way and then sell high. And they refused to come back to Congress and explain what's going on. Once their lies have been exposed. And the Democrats said, we simply want them to address these lies. And the Republicans said, no, we're not even going to hold a hearing. We're just it's a vote. And if you guys don't show up, we'll suspend the rules, we'll have the vote, and we'll send them onto the floor of the Senate, which is exactly what they did today, and with Jeff Sessions as well. So, Samir, we've got a lot of work to do, but we've got just a lot of work. Samir, I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. Mark in Livonia, Michigan. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hi there, Tom. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you.
I hear all of this in the media about how this Judge Gorsuch is such a honest and strict constitutionalist and all this.
Right, which is a phrase that is meaningless.
I mean, if that were so, he ought to be turning around and demanding that the Senate hold hearings and give Judge Garland a chance.
Right.
Because constitutionally, that was their job. He ought to be forcing them to do their job.
Yeah.
Somebody should be.
Yeah. It ain't going to happen, but you're absolutely right, Mark. You're absolutely right. Thank you very much for the call. I mean, this is, thank you, Mark. This is so, I'm running out of adjectives, I'm running out of superlatives. I mean, this is just so over the top what is going on. We will prevent for a year our nation's first black president from having his own Supreme Court nominee. We're going to prevent him for a year And we're going to put in some right-wing guy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Some right-wing guy whose mother screwed up the EPA when Ronald Reagan put her in charge of that. I mean, this is nuts. And welcome back. Robert in Vail, Arizona, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning. Good morning. I love your show.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk about the ultimate corruption. If you could give me about 6.5 minutes.
I can't give you 6.5 minutes, Robert. I'm sorry.
Let me rattle on for a while then, okay?
Yeah.
My name is Genius Robert, I think. That's why my name is Genius Robert, okay?
Okay.
Are you there?
I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay, I just heard a thing. Anyway, what it all started out with is empowering people to this country with the idea of exploiting people, right? Did that happen? I guess you could answer that it did happen, right?
If you're talking about Europeans ripping off the Native Americans, yeah.
Right, and they ripped off the Native Americans. They had feelings, just like I have feelings, okay?
Sure, of course.
My parents were from Mexico. I was born here.
Right. Robert, what's your point?
Well, my point is corruption.
Okay.
That's the ultimate point. And I want to expose it, okay?
All right. So how are you going to do that?
Only in Bernie Sanders as a person that would do good for this country. That's why I attended his things. Mm-hmm. And through corruption, he wasn't able to go over the top. But as vast corruption here, and my point is always to be kind, to administer laws that are going to help people, just like it says in the Constitution that I believe in.
Yeah, I'm with you, Robert. I'm with you. I think we have to do that. Robert, thank you for the call. Ted in Troy, Montana. Hey, Ted, what's on your mind? Ted? What? Watching Free Speech in Troy, Montana? No, Ted. Okay, let's go to Peter in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Love your show. I just had a real quick question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're saying if we go to impeachment, then we wind up with Mike Pence, but...
Which is not an argument against impeachment. It's just a reality check.
Yeah, sure. But I'm saying, just thinking through it strategically, do you think that the Republicans would really rally around Pence? Isn't he like a better opponent? Just curious.
Pence is a fully formed creature of the Koch brothers and the Republican Party, and yeah, the Republicans would definitely rally around him. But the point, I think, the really important point is that it's not just Donald Trump. If we focus all of our attention on Donald Trump and say he's the locus of all evil, then he is going to overreach. He's going to blow it. I mean, the London bookies right now are offering 4-to-1 odds that he gets impeached within a year by the Republicans. So that's pretty likely. But the problem is, if we focus all of our this is where the cancer is on him, we completely overlook the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is a cancer right now. It has been completely taken over by petro-billionaires and libertarian billionaires and transnational corporations. And we need to be causing people to believe that the Republican Party needs to be impeached. And of course, the way you do that is by voting against them in the next election. You kick them out of office. So while, I get the let's impeach Trump and Trump is evil and the Cheeto-faced, Satan and all this kind of stuff. I get all that. But and Peter, thank you for the call. But we really need to be focusing on how badly corrupted the Republican Party is right now. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Carol in St. Paul, Minnesota, listening on AM 950. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Oh, good afternoon, Tom. I'm going to take you off speaker.
Thank you.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, let me just tell you and anybody else listening to AM 950 that the Blue State Ball is coming up in a month or two, and I'm planning on being there. You know, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Well,
So cool.
Say hello.
Okay. So what's on your mind today, Carol?
Well, when we're talking about wages and we're talking about making that thing where the unions have to represent somebody else, is I don't think a lot of people understand wages. The union wages help make everybody's wages better. And for anybody that is listening to your station right now who gets prevailing wage, which almost all government contracts are issued with a proviso that they have to pay prevailing wage. So what the government does is it looks at every in your area, what is the industry that they are asking you to, what is the work that they're asking you to perform, and in that industry, what is the normal wage that is paid?
Yeah, this is the Davis-Bacon Act, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And especially a lot of truck drivers, and I can speak with some authority here, who do driving for the mail system, long-haul trucking that is contracted out through the mail because they have some different rules, and so a lot of independent trucking companies and or truckers haul this mail long haul. They're paid based on prevailing wage, and if the wages go down because there is no union, their wages will go down. Right. And I don't think people make the connections between union wages, prevailing wage, and then everybody else. You know, the guy that's sitting in the office, if he could make $75,000 a year digging digits, get double time for overtime and vacation and all of these benefits, he wouldn't sit in that office. He would go dig ditches.
Yeah, there you go. And in fact, when John McCain said that they couldn't get people to pick lettuce in Arizona, you know, unless they, even if they offered $50 an hour, you know, he got thousands and thousands of responses from people saying, "Are you paying $50 an hour? I'd be glad to come to Arizona. I'll move to Arizona and pick lettuce and do nothing but picking lettuce." The other point, Carol, that needs to be made is that study after study, I mean, this is not even in dispute, even by Republicans, is that for every union job at a union pay scale, typically in the local workplace, there is a non-union job that pays the same amount. And the reason why is that the union job sets the floor, the local floor for wages. And so non-union employers have to compete with union employers for employees. And so the union becomes the bar that, you know, that everybody has to hit. And yes. And so, you know, basically, if, you know, when Reagan came into office and a third of our workforce was unionized, another third of our workforce was not unionized, but they had union wages and benefits. And then the remaining third had, you know, they were kind of out in the cold. But as Reaganism has shrunk the share of unions in the United States from roughly a third of our economy, or a little more than a quarter of our economy, down to around 6% of our economy, the prevailing wages, as you point out, have collapsed, and union wages have collapsed, and non-union wages have collapsed. And this is you know, and it's kind of papered over by statistics that show household income. It's so difficult now, even with a sophisticated internet search, to find government statistics or anybody's statistics on individual income from, say, the 1930s until today and how that's changed. But the reality is, from the 1930s until the 1980s, individual income was continually climbing along with productivity. And starting in the 80s with Reaganism, it flattened off, and it has actually declined over the last 35 years. And individual income has, while household income has gone up slightly. Why? Because 2 people are going to work now instead of 1, or 3 people instead of 2, or people are working a job and a half instead of a job. And you're absolutely right on all those points, Carol. Thank you so much for calling and pointing it out. It's really important. It's very important stuff. Kathy in Emporia, Kansas. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
I want to know what would be, for a person of limited financial means and cannot attend large protests, what is the most effective way to effect change in our policy and our government as it currently exists? Right.
Well, my advice is always just this kind of simple 3-part formula. I talked about it around the same time yesterday, Kathy. Number 1, get inside the Democratic Party, your local Democratic Party. And in Kansas, the local Democratic Party is probably fairly weakened, by Brownback and all his assaults. And so, show up and say, hey, I want to help reinvigorate this party. Number two, find an outside group, not necessarily to go to the demonstrations if you're limited in a way that prevents you from doing that, but you can find outside groups that you can just interact with, on the internet or by telephone or whatever, that meets your criteria for, this is important stuff, whether it's, saving the whales or whether it's, saving the, whatever it may be. And then number three, wake up as many friends as possible. Tell them about the media that you know about, the progressive media. Tell them about our program and others. Tell them the facts of what's going on. Kathy, I have to move along, but I hope that's helpful to you. Greg in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller.
Thank you.
I'm a farmer out here in Colorado, and one of my concerns is GMO seed. I was performing a search, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and stumbled upon the Heritage Foundation out of Washington, D.C. Are you familiar with them?
Boy, am I ever. They used to be our landlord, in fact.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, my when I started going through their website a little bit and stumbled onto their blueprint for this administration, which was actually published, I believe, like in July or June of 2016.
Yep.
And it's basically, from what I can tell, a step-by-step program on what departments to reduce, what departments to, actually totally eliminate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just got me just sitting here going, wow, because
it's an all-out assault on government. I mean, there's a simple reality here, Greg, and that is that nature abhors a vacuum. That if you take out something else will fill that space. And so when so-called conservatives, when Republicans, when right-wingers say we want smaller government, what they're saying basically is we want we want the government to have less ability to positively impact your life, or, they would argue negatively impact your life by collecting taxes and things like that, and more ability for corporations to control your life, because it's one or the other. Governance, the country's going to get run. The roads are going to be made, and it's going to happen one way or another. It's either going to be government functions or it's going to be corporate functions. And the right-wingers are saying we want corporations and billionaires to be running everything. And by the way, if you get sick, go to private charity. And Democrats and progressives are saying, no, there actually is a role for government. It's the reason why Jefferson, Madison, Washington, all those guys risked their lives to create our government. And they actually believed in good government. They believed in the general welfare of all the people. In fact, the phrase general welfare appears multiple times in the Constitution of the United States. And the Democratic Party says, we believe the government can be a force for the good, for positive. And most Americans actually agree with that. They like Social Security, they like Medicare, they want environmental protections. And right now we've got Republicans trying to chop up regulations, I call them consumer protections, that would protect us from banksters robbing us, regulations that would protect us from the, right now, as we speak, the Republicans are trying to repeal a law that would protect us from coal mines, mountaintop coal mining, fouling our streams and rivers. I mean, it's nuts. So, we need to wake people up to this. Greg, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM there in Colorado. It's been quite a day. More to come, no doubt. It's like, it's Trump time. It's outrage a day. It's amazing what is going on. And I still haven't gotten to Joseph Goebbels' secretary. We'll have to do that tomorrow. So anyhow, thanks so much for being with us. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, including you. Tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.